Searching for the ideal place to settle, a young family moves into a new home, believing their prayers have been answered. However, just a year later, they find themselves gone, never to return. They are left questioning just who truly answered those prayers and what exactly invaded their lives. An enigmatic entity that perpetrated violence and terror upon them. The untold story of the Black Monk of Pontefract. In September 1954, Bill Farah and his wife Barbara moved into a new home in the historic market town of Pontefract, England. They were a young family with a 2-year-old daughter named Jane. At 30 East Drive, with its 3 bedrooms, this should have been their ideal home. Yet less than a year later, they moved out. The Farahs quickly had grown terrified of their new home. Their dream had seemingly become a nightmare. Objects moved on their own. Voices echoed in empty rooms and halls. And large rips and tears appeared on their furniture out of nowhere, forming an ominous atmosphere that began to smother them all. These events would culminate one night when Bill and Barbara found their daughter crying, her small face inexplicably covered in scratches, small trickles of blood dripping from each slash, with no rational cause. The family had no pets to blame for their daughter Jane's injuries, and even after they placed cotton mitts on her hands, the wounds continued to appear. The poor child cried every night, leaving her parents scared and confused about what to do and just what could be happening. One day, Barbara frantically rushed upstairs at the piercing sound of her child's cries. What she discovered would shake her to her core. She would find a pillow placed over Jane's face, as if someone or something was attempting to extinguish her young life. At that moment, the answer became clear. The family had to leave, and leave immediately. So they did. They would leave the house and its dark forces. Friends and neighbors of the Farahs, the Pritchard family, would be convinced by the Farah family to switch homes with them, ultimately leaving them at the mercy of whatever malevolent forces that dwelled within the walls. August of 1966, the Pritchards would move into the old Farah residence. Their new home was quite a bit larger than their last, and seemed to be the answer to their prayers. The Pritchard family consisted of Father Joe, Mother Jean, and their small children, daughter Diane and son Philip. Shortly after moving in, however, the same strange occurrences began to manifest. Strange sounds, such as banging and knocking, began to be heard, reverberating throughout the house, with no rational origin. Horrid smells began to waft throughout the house as well, again with no explanation as to what could be causing them. The children first, and then the parents, began to be terrified by a shadowy, dark figure that began to make its presence known at various hours of the day and night, seemingly watching their every move. Jean Pritchard ended up giving the creepy figure several nicknames. She called it Fred and Mr. Nobody, but history would come to know the entity by a very different and certainly a scarier name by most standards: the Black Monk of Pontefract. The Pritchards, noticing that these happenings were far from normal, approached their former neighbors, the Farahs, and asked them if they had ever experienced anything weird when they had lived there. The Farahs would say no. In August of 1980, the Pritchard family had long been suffering from the haunting. Colin Wilson, a well-known writer on subjects including the paranormal and mysticism, visited the family after being tipped off by a local historian, a man named Tom Cuniff. Cuniff had stumbled across newspaper clippings from the late 1960s, alleging that a Pontefract family had experienced poltergeist phenomena. As he dug deeper into the history of the area, he discovered a rather disturbing story, one that he believed could be connected to the haunting itself. In the 16th century, a monk was executed for the brutal assault and murders of several young victims. Upon reading that the family was being stalked by a shadowy robed figure, he put two and two together. During his research, upon discovering that the family still lived in the same house, Cuniff contacted Wilson, prompting Wilson to journey to Yorkshire to interview them, to see if perhaps they could get to the bottom of things. With the information provided by Wilson's records, a more detailed version of the haunting chronologically begins to emerge. According to Wilson's records, in August 1966, on that Thursday, most of the family, Joe Pritchard, his wife Jean, and their 12-year-old daughter Diane, were on holiday in Devon, leaving their 15-year-old son Philip and Jean's mother Sarah Scholes and her sister Marie at home. Philip had reached the age when family holidays had lost their appeal, so as most adolescents do, he spent much time to himself, reading in the family garden. That Thursday, while outside, Philip returned indoors to get himself a drink. As he did this, he noticed something bizarre. His grandmother, sitting in the living room, heavily focused on her knitting, was completely oblivious to a gray-hued cloud floating around her. Philip would later say that it was a chalk-like, powdery substance, and from this cloud, it appeared to be falling from, not from the ceiling. The top half of the room was perfectly clear, and yet curious dust seemed to materialize from nowhere. Weirded out, Philip returned to the kitchen, only to find several large pools of water covering the floor, with no apparent origin. Then, heading back to the living room, he saw the dust, or cloud, had continued to fall like a miniature snowstorm, forming a fine white layer on the furniture, and even on top of his grandmother. Rushing to another room to get his aunt's attention, he would bring her out into the living room, where she would notice the very same thing. Unsure of just what it could be, she called to her mother to gain her attention and get her out of whatever the cloud or strange powder seemed to be. Heading towards the kitchen to get her cleaned up, she too would notice the puddles of water everywhere. As Marie tried to mop up in the kitchen, new puddles supposedly manifested. She would pull up the linoleum to reveal no leak underneath, and the water wasn't falling from above them either. So just like the dust in the other room, the puddles seemed to have come from nowhere. The odd drama intensified when, after the water supply to the house was turned off by a helpful neighbor, the water company was called to the property. Pipes were checked, the linoleum lifted once again, and drains examined, but nothing was found to be broken or blocked. The water companies suggested that some strange condensation caused by the summer weather might be responsible, but after about an hour, they left, and the mysterious puddles stopped appearing. However, before the day ended, more odd happenings were reported. Sugar and tea leaves were emptied from their dispensers in the kitchen and sprinkled all across the countertops. Cupboards vibrated and shook, and loud bangs were heard from upstairs. A plant which was usually located at the foot of the staircase, was also mysteriously transported halfway up, its pot found separately on the landing above. Unable to tolerate the house any longer, Philip and his grandmother left with and would spend the night with Aunt Marie. Vic Kelly, Marie's husband, unhappy with the strange situation, reportedly phoned the police to check on the house. With Vic present, upon law enforcement's arrival, everything seemed normal, with no intruder being found. Nothing else seemed out of place either, until they found a glass shattered on the floor. In one of Joe and Jean Pritchard's wedding photos, the photo itself slashed from side to side, as if with a sharp knife. Chilled to his core, Vic simply followed the officers back outside of the home and then closed the front door of 30 East Drive and returned to his home. When Jean, Joe, and Diane returned from their holiday, Sarah relayed the unsettling events to them. There was a disbelief at first, but as she spoke, everyone would hear 3 loud and distinct bangs reverberate throughout the home. Then, a cold wind blew through the house, almost as if the entity had perhaps left. But that was far from what would happen. It was merely seemingly taking a break. According to testimonies recorded by Colin Wilson, the haunting truly resumed for the Pritchards in 1968, when Jean decided to redecorate Diane's bedroom. As I've noticed while studying numerous other hauntings, construction or redecoration, or essentially changing what once was, seems to be a way to disturb or wake up whatever forces, good or bad, that could be dwelling within a space. Following this, mysterious temperature changes began to be experienced. Inexplicable bangs and knocks once again plagued the family, and daily household items, such as in one instance, a paintbrush, began to be flung across the room by unseen hands. One just so happened to barely miss Jean's face by mere inches during the remodel itself. It's even been claimed that Mrs. Pritchard witnessed, in the dim moonlight one night, as she went to the bathroom, a long strip of wallpaper standing on end and swaying like a cobra. When she attempted to grab it, the strip simply fell to the floor, causing a feeling of fear to grip her that one would seldomly experience otherwise. Horrifically, within the same room that was being remodeled, not too long after this occurred, the family vacuum flew into the air, swinging around as if wielded by giant, invisible hands. Screaming, Jean dropped onto all fours and rushed back to her daughter, as wallpaper and various objects continued to be thrown towards her. The unseen presence in the house had returned, and it seemed more aggressive than ever, particularly fixated on Diane's bedroom. What followed was described as 9 months of chaos, in which all manner of violent activity was reported. Bangs and thumps echoed from Diane's bedroom with such physical aggression that she occasionally took to sleeping in her parents' room. Ornaments were thrown and levitated, and lights flickered on and off repeatedly. One day, the entire contents of the family's china cabinet were reportedly hurled onto the floor, with not a single precious item being smashed or chipped in the process. One evening, a particularly chilling incident marked an escalation in the severity of the activity. In Diane's room yet again, the lights randomly went out, and a huge shadow appeared on the wall before her. As she witnessed this firsthand in the hallway, while her mother scrambled with a flashlight to try and turn the lights back on. As the teenage girl watched, a heavy oak hall stand floated into the air and rushed towards her with incredible speed. In her attempt to escape, Diane tripped and fell, her back up against the stairs, with the hall stand being thrown on top of her. The weight of the piece of furniture pressed down on her small body, pinning her against the steps. As she struggled to breathe and free herself, another heavy object, a sewing machine that had been on top of the stand, was also thrown onto her. When the lights finally illuminated the scene, her family rushed to help, but the hall stand was too heavy and firmly positioned to move. Jean and Joe struggled to free their daughter, and yet strangely, despite the pressure, Diane was unharmed. The heavy furniture was merely being held in place by some invisible force, enough to keep her trapped, but not to injure her. When instructed to release her, the force seemingly obliged, finally allowing the hall stand and sewing machine to be removed. The poltergeist then seemed particularly fascinated with Diane Pritchard. In addition to the hall stand incident, it was reported that she was tossed from her bed as many as 4 times in a night by the unseen entity. Her bedroom often turned icy cold, and she told her parents it felt as if though someone was present with her, always watching her and lurking just beyond her sight. On one occasion, while standing in the living room combing her hair in front of a mirror, a brass crucifix that she found comfort in with her faith was thrown from a shelf and struck her in the back, sticking to her skin like a magnet. When the crucifix finally fell away, her mother inspected her and discovered a cross-shaped red mark on her skin between her shoulder blades. The mark left reportedly lasted for days, showing the strong force of which it had been thrown with. Before long, the house at 30 East Drive gained quite the local reputation. After being featured in 2 Yorkshire newspapers in September of 1968, people either actively avoided the house or sought to engage with the alleged haunting. Ghost hunters attempted to gain admission into the residence, and it was even reported that a group of students who requested permission to camp in the garden were forced to settle for the large round grass verge in front of the house when Jean Pritchard declined their request. However, even from that distance, the group claimed to still have heard an assortment of bangs and crashes. Along with this newfound fame, it became commonplace for the Pritchard's family's neighbors to experience disturbances within their own homes, as the noises were reportedly that loud, emanating from the Pritchard residence. When all the family's possessions upstairs in the bedrooms were allegedly thrown out of windows and onto the ground below, it was impossible for anyone in the area to deny that something bizarre was happening. Something that no one could truly comprehend or truly understand. Eventually, the family began calling their unwanted house guest Mr. Nobody, later nicknaming it Fred. Despite its attempts to force them out, however, the Pritchard family remained. When a local preacher, a man named Reverend Davy, advised the family that something evil lurked in their home and that they should move, Jean reportedly scoffed at him, asking him, "Why should I be driven out of my home by a ghost?" This was certainly a testament to the family's resolve, no doubt. As the disturbances worsened and the activity further intensified, the family yet continued to persevere. Perfectly good and often newly purchased food would spoil, something strange that became a calling card for the entity. as if whatever it was brought death and decay along with it. Aside from spoiling food, Mr. Nobody, as they called it, would also often smear jam on door handles and would often throw toilet paper all over the house. Fine china plates and cups would be thrown onto the floor, sometimes shattered, and other times perfectly fine. But yet, despite being watched by the dark-robed figure that had plagued them for years, and all of its accompanying terror, the family still refused to be chased away, even after both Jean and Joe saw the tall, shadowy figure with a hood standing in their bedroom doorway. They had been in bed when they heard the door creak open, and both turned to see the terrifying apparition. Others reported seeing the tall figure in a long hooded garment as well. At night, frightened family members heard loud, labored breathing outside of their doors. It became clear that Mr. Nobody, or as he was increasingly known as, the monk, was gaining power. It was as if the creature fed off of their fear. The activity would peak yet again one evening when all of the lights went out, and Diane, along with her mother and brother, would experience something dark that none of them would ever forget. As the family huddled together in the dark, trying to find their way around the home, Diane suddenly, as if she had been grabbed by large invisible hands, was forcibly dragged up the stairs by her throat. Colin Wilson, who documented the events in his book, noted that Diane's cardigan was stretched out in front of her, as if the monk was tugging on it with one hand, while gripping her neck with the other. Roused by her screams and gasps for air, Philip and Jean rushed to pull Diane back down the stairs, but they were both repelled, thrown back by what felt like large, clawed hands. Fighting for her life and on the verge of blacking out, as she struggled, Diane fortunately would ultimately be freed, almost as quickly as she had been attacked. Philip later explained that it was as though his thought of trying to touch the presence had caused it to release his sister. When the family inspected the profusely shaking and traumatized girl once the lights turned back on, they would see red hand marks around her neck. To say they were terrified was perhaps an understatement. Although they collectively didn't want to leave their home, they desperately wished for the entity to depart. The family would contact religious figures. They would pray and sprinkle holy water throughout the entire property, but despite their best efforts, nothing seemed to work. In fact, these actions seemed to exacerbate the disturbances, almost as if they were angering the entity itself with their efforts. One of Joe's friends, recently returned from Scotland, recounted how people there hung garlic over doors and windows to keep out spirits. Fascinatingly, when the Pritchards followed suit, the activity diminished, eventually disappearing altogether. Thus, what began for the Pritchards in August of 1966 ceased after 2 years, by May of 1969. When Colin met with the family in 1980, he reported no ongoing activity. Although it's not exactly clear when, the home would eventually find its way into the hands of a man who's all too familiar with the paranormal, an investigator named Richard Estep. If these accounts are true, the events at 30 East Drive appear to be a classic case of poltergeist activity, similar to many other documented instances of spirit hauntings, like the Enfield poltergeist in 1977. The activity is often centered around adolescents, and there were adolescents present in this case as well. First, a 15-year-old Philip in 1966, and then an aged 15 Diane in 1968. Wilson oddly noted that nothing seemed to occur in the house while Diane was at school. Objects, even large and heavy items like solid oak furniture, were said to move on their own accord. Food, too, appearing irresistible to the entity. Food at 30 East Drive, besides rotting and being moved and displaced, would also mysteriously manifest bite marks. The appearance of puddles of water on the kitchen floor at the beginning of the pontefract case is also a hallmark of other poltergeist occurrences. The respected parapsychology researcher Guy Lyon Playfair suggested that the neat puddles found in the Pritchard home and others allegedly haunted by poltergeists might be some form of condensation of the energy used by the entities. The activity disappearing as the children transition from adolescence to adulthood is also consistent with other poltergeist cases. Yet despite these claims, many argue that activity at 30 East Drive never truly ceased, asserting that it predates the Pritchards and their teenage children by over a decade. At the beginning of this story, I referenced a testimony from the Farah family and their 2-year-old daughter, Jane, who had lived at the property before the Pritchards. This particular testimony was presented in the 2019 book, The Black Monk of Pontefract, and alleges horrific events, including the baby girl covered in scratch marks, and told of the attempted suffocation of the same child by what is presumed to be the same black monk entity that haunted the Pritchards. However, it's peculiar that Jean and Joe didn't report similar experiences regarding their young children, having taken over 30 East Drive from the Farahs in the mid-1950s. By the time of the alleged onset of activity in August of 1966, they'd been in the house for several years. Yet as far as we know, it didn't target them in the same way. But why would this be the case? Perhaps the poltergeist, or whatever it was, maybe a demonic entity, was in a state of paranormal hibernation for a decade or more, and was woken up, so to speak, for one reason or another. Yet this inconsistency becomes all the more intriguing when one examines the 2019 book, The Black Monk of Pontefract. Indeed, the authors of the text, paranormal researcher Richard Estep and the current owner of 30 East Drive, film producer Bill Bungie, argue that Bill Farah and his family represent a previously unknown origin of the Pontefract case. In their book, this new starting point is ultimately used to support their conclusion that the Black Monk of Pontefract is less likely to be a poltergeist and more likely to be a demonic entity, one that remains on the property to this day. It is indisputable that the Farah family not only existed, but also lived at the property before the Pritchards, and there is ample record to prove this. In fact, the author's claims were allegedly presented from Mr. Farah himself, but the family moved into 30 East Drive in September of 1954 and would leave within a year due to horrific activity. In the aforementioned book, the reader is treated to tales of the dark monk, which are accompanied by many photographs of dark demonic entities captured within the walls of the home. Does this house still exist? It most certainly does. Today, the former council house is just as famous as it is creepy. Those who visit the site have documented many scratches and suffocating sensations, as well as capturing numerous photographs of the alleged black monk entity itself. These alleged pieces of evidence, accompanied with the two families who lived there and the current owner's experiences, we are left with more questions than answers. A few of my questions are these. Just who was this black monk? If they did exist, what drove them to such madness to abuse the young? Are they perhaps a man of God at one point, and ultimately corrupted by darkness? The same darkness that would corrupt them in life and consume them in death. Perhaps this is what led to the violent manifestations that affected all of those who crossed the threshold of 30 East Drive. Was the entity a malevolent human spirit, a demonic entity, or a textbook case of poltergeist activity? All questions we truly may never have the answers to. But one thing is certain. There was something that called the house at 30 East Drive in Pontefract home. Something that was not of this world. A dark, robed, and lurking presence that stalked those who dwelt there in the land of the living. Perhaps it still lurks there, stalking, watching, and waiting for the right time to awake and wreak havoc upon those of us who still breathe and whose hearts still beat. Thank you guys so much for watching this special episode of Mystery Archives. I truly hope that you enjoyed this deep dive. This episode was suggested by Oliver Gold, who wanted to dedicate this episode to his late friend, Kieran Lee. He said that they would have enjoyed the episode as well, but had recently passed away. I hope I did the story justice for the both of you, my friend. Thank you again for suggesting this incredibly interesting and spooky tale. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe with notifications on, and leave me a comment below of what you think the Black Monk was. And other than that, last month's limited designs are now gone and unfortunately unavailable forever. However, I do have some brand new limited merchandise that's going up just now that will only be available for the month of November. I'm planning on doing 2 more limited launches. This one that I just mentioned now in November and another one in December. We're going to do some special Christmas merchandise. And other than that, guys, it's going to be few and far between after these in total 3 drops are done. So head on over to my official store, check them out, and support me in the channel and get yourself something awesome to wear. After a terrifying encounter with a demonic entity in the woods outside of their home, 2 brothers find themselves under attack by dark and malevolent forces. With no place of refuge from torment, not even their own home, will they escape the wrath of a real-life nightmare they have unearthed, or will the darkness take them? This is the untold story of the demonic Shadow Man case that was experienced by brothers Tom and Tim Yancey. With the majority of my audience not being subscribed, please consider subscribing with notifications on, liking the video, and leaving a comment, as well as checking out one of hundreds of videos available on my channel. Thank you. Lake Worth, Florida, founded in 1913, the city plays home to the arts, boasting festivals, boutiques, music venues, and a historic theater. But amongst the songs, paintings, and acting, it is also the home to something evil that lurks just beneath the surface. In the late 1960s, the Yancey family called Lake Worth their home. Living near the mostly underdeveloped southern woods in the town at that time, brothers Tim and Tom, along with their father Sonny and mother Barbara, up until this point, had lived a rather quiet life. Tim would describe his childhood home as a very peaceful and remote place to live. It was fairly isolated and in the middle of nowhere. His mother Barbara was a beacon of light and joy, a woman who always had a diamond smile upon her face. His father was a stern man, a battle-hardened Korean War veteran who then worked as a carpenter doing construction. Sonny suffered from PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, as a result of the war, and according to Barbara, was a totally different person when he came back. He had been a sergeant in charge of a mortar platoon during the war and would very rarely speak of what had happened. Although both of the brothers later would recall that he told them a few different stories of his time there. One story that following a battle, he had to arrange for mass graves to be dug and for bulldozers to lay the dead to rest. While suffering with PTSD, Sonny tended to have a short fuse on his temper, but for some reason, this particular summer, it seemed to get inexplicably worse. Where the family lived was remote and surrounded by lush woods, and prior to being settled, the land where the house now stood had been heavily utilized during the slave trade, as well as being the home to numerous bouts of violence between warring Native American tribes. So with the combinations of the terrors of war and those experiencing persecution, over the years, these heavy emotions seemed to leak into the earth, and the woods in and of themselves seemed to become a beacon for darkness, almost as if the black hearts of those who perpetrated the acts still rested beneath the leaves, sticks, and stones of the forest floor. Playing together as brothers often do, Tim and Tom would spend much time within those very same woods, bonding, exploring, and having a great time. Sonny had built a fort for the boys to enhance their time spent out there, and at this time, Tom was 12 years old and Tim was 7. One chilly fall day, as Tom ventured into the woods alone, as he approached the fort, he began to get an eerie feeling, as if someone or something was watching him. With his inner voice screaming, he bolted and ran inside the fort. As he peered through the openings in between the various boards and peeking past the cloth-covered windows, at first he saw nothing. But as his heart began to subside from beating out of his chest, he began to hear the crunching of crisp autumn leaves around him. And through the darkness of the boards, he sees a silhouette of a creature. Although the figure appears man-like, something tells him that it's not of this world. Tom, doing the sensible thing, runs for his life, leaving the fort behind. Terrified at what he had just experienced, he decides to not tell anyone about what had happened. As Tom ventures back to the house, disturbed by what he had been through, Tim had entered through another path in the woods, blissfully unaware of his brother's plight. As the boy walks the crispy path of dried leaves, he too begins to feel as if he's being watched. Then in front of him, up in a tree, he sees something strange, something out of place. There in the tree, with the environment reacting around it, there appears to be some kind of creature, but this creature is either see-through or it's reflecting its surroundings, almost like a freakish distortion of reality, perhaps something that shouldn't have been within the confines of our reality. As his eyes grow larger with fear, this entity begins to make its way down the tree and then lands in front of him, mere feet away from the boy, hitting the ground with a loud thud. This is enough to truly frighten the young man, and he too, similar to his brother, decides to run for the house, the one place a child should feel safe to be. Tim frantically makes his way out of the woods and quickly into the arms of his mother, who was near the front door of their house. After explaining things as best as he could, Barbara calms him with the love only a mother can provide, asking him to calm down. She tried her best to convince him that it was perhaps an animal that he had startled, and that things would be okay. And although she did what she could, as we'll come to see, this would be far from what would take place. The brothers in due time would discuss the strangeness of their experiences in the woods with one another, confiding in each other, and trying to make sense of just what this thing or what these things were. Fearing that even talking about it could prompt a visit, the boys did their best to move on and shift their focus to other activities, fearing that if they spoke of it, they would invoke the wrath of what they began to call the Shadow Man. During the day, things seemed to regain a small amount of normalcy, but at night, the brothers began to see the very same figure outside, usually near the tree line, presenting a thick, man-like shadow, always watching and lurking like a wild animal stalking its prey. One night, as the moon peeks through the clouds overhead, Tim is jolted awake out of a sound sleep. With his eyes opening and slowly adjusting to the darkness of his room, he tries to make sense as to why he was suddenly woke up. As he glances towards his window, with the faintest amount of moonlight illuminating the room, he sees a shadow go past. Scared, but getting up to investigate, he reluctantly looks, and he sees nothing. Thinking that perhaps his mind is playing tricks on him, Tim lays his head back down to try and sleep again. But as he gets comfortable, right before he closes his eyes, he again sees this menacing shadow pass by his window. Attempting to wake up his brother, but unable to do so, he once again gathers the courage to take a look through the window. Peering around their yard and towards the tree line, there in the mists emanating from the woods, he sees the shadowy outline of a man. And this man appears to be staring directly into his soul from afar. It then suddenly begins to rush towards him. Absolutely petrified with fear, the young man lets out a blood-curdling scream. His brother quickly wakes up, and so do his parents. With Sonny being the first inside the room, he asks just what is happening. After being told by Tim that there was a man in the yard, he quickly grabs a flashlight and begins sweeping the property. He ultimately would find nothing. Several weeks later, as the boys slept in their room, 12-year-old Tom starts acting strangely. Waking up to the sound of footsteps, Tim sees his brother in the middle of their room. As he calls out to him, he receives no response, and Tom then begins to walk and leave their room. Calling out to their parents as well as his brother, Tim continues to follow him as he descends the stairs, headed towards their front door. With Sonny and Barbara rushing close behind him, they watch as Tom heads out of the front door and into the yard. As Tim would describe it later, it was as if he was being called out to something, or there was something drawing him into those woods. It was very frightening for me, because I knew there was something out there, and I didn't understand why this was all happening. Sonny is able to wake the boy up as the four stand in the yard. Tom seemed to have been sleepwalking, unaware of what was taking place. Although this hadn't happened previously, and was completely new to the family, this incident would be far from the last. For the next several weeks, Tom would continue to sleepwalk. At times, with other members of the family unaware that he was missing, Tom would find himself waking up next to the lake, out in those foreboding woods. To try and keep the boy from sleepwalking, his parents began to implement measures to keep him from leaving the house. Frustrated, and understandably so, having to get up late into the night, what soon became night after night, with Tom often able to maneuver his way out of locked rooms, they took to stacking chairs in front of the boys' room, in hopes that this would prevent Tom from escaping and potentially hurting himself under one of his spells. Later that night, after the family had gone to bed, Tom took to waking up as per usual. As he aimlessly tries to unlock the door to their room, he wakes up Tim. Fearing that his brother would wake up their father, he tries to get him to wake up and realize just what he's doing. And while this is taking place, the closet door directly across the room from Tom begins to shudder, and then it opens by itself. Then, as if he was being controlled like a marionette puppet, Tom would turn around, face the closet, and then walk inside. Then, with the boy inside, the door would shut behind him, once again seemingly by itself, as if it were operated by unseen hands. Tim, scared but also transfixed on what was taking place, began to hear a conversation. He heard his brother speaking, then he heard another voice, a low, gravelly, deep voice. This frightens the young Tim so bad that despite his fear of his father, he calls out to his parents for protection, and thankfully, his parents heed the call. As they rush to push the chairs aside, they finally do, and then throw the door open to find out just what had happened now. Tim, pointing to the closet, indicates that Tom is inside. Heading to the closet door and opening it, they find the boy sat down inside now, apparently awake. Upon asking him just what was going on, all Tom could say was that there was a man in here. In later interviews, Tom would say that he remembers waking up inside the darkness of the closet to the voice of a man, and then upon speaking with him, towards the back of the closet, he saw two red eyes staring back at him. Despite knowing of their son's sleepwalking, his parents tried to argue that he was clearly messing around in the closet, possibly playing with toys, and they then scolded both of the boys for waking them up yet again. In the weeks to come, as their parents grow increasingly angry, the Yancey brothers continue to experience the abyssal force that they have come to refer to as the Shadow Man. One night, the entity seems to find a new way of terrorizing the brothers. Tim has suddenly woken up when he begins to feel small things hit his comforter and mattress. Feeling where the objects had fallen, his hands discover rocks like small pebbles, and thinking it was his brother messing with him, he asked him to stop and then laid his head back down onto his pillow. And then more of them started falling, pelting the blanket that covered him. He now knows for certain it is not Tom, because he's looking directly at him, and he is fast asleep. As the rocks continue falling onto him, he then discovers leaves, and then pine cones as well. Then he feels something drop onto his head, and this something begins to crawl. Prying off whatever this thing was and throwing it, the boy begins to scream. Barbara soon comes to his aid, and upon turning on the lights, she too finds the stones, pine cones, leaves, and to her surprise, giant Florida cockroaches. It was as if the Shadow Man was bringing in things from the woods, but for what reason remained unclear. It was with this incident that Barbara began to notice that perhaps it wasn't just the boys' imaginations at work. Perhaps there was something terrorizing them. In the weeks that follow this incident, Barbara too begins to notice the ever-growing hostile environment within the home, and soon begins to seek answers from any and all sources. While her husband is at work and her children are at school, she purchases a Ouija board, and upon returning home, places it on the coffee table in the living room. Not being into the occult previously, she doesn't really know what she's doing, but wants to do her best to communicate with whatever could be there, and to try and seek answers as to why it was tormenting her family. She tries to make contact, but doesn't receive any answers. Later that day, the family retires to their beds to catch some sleep. Little did they know of Barbara's attempts to contact the other side, and little did they know that hell was about to be unleashed upon them. As everyone drifts off to dreamland, Tim once again finds himself being woken up out of a dead sleep. Perhaps it was his intuition. It's hard to know for sure why. But as he wakes up and sits up in his bed, he sees a dark hand emerge from the closet in their room. As the familiar fear grips him, he gets up and shakes his brother Tom awake. And to Tom's disbelief, As he looks ahead where his brother is pointing, he too sees the hand, and then a more fuller figure begins to emerge from the closet opening. Before both of their eyes, a shadowy figure emerges, casting itself onto the wall, with glowing red eyes staring at them. It begins to climb horizontally on the wall towards them. With the brothers absolutely shaken to their core, they scream for their parents as the figure dissipates, as if it was never there. The two then rush out of their bedroom and run up to their parents' bedroom. And although apprehensive because of their father, they would rather deal with his wrath than that of the Shadow Man. Doing a knock and then opening their door, Tim leads the boys and calls out to their parents. He tells them that the man was back and that he was on their wall like a fly. This bizarre statement from his son and the continuous lack of sleep prompts Sonny to explode. He tells the boys that there is no man, that they're dealing with the boogeyman, and that the boogeyman does bad things to bad kids, and if they were good, he would simply just go away. With tears in his eyes, Tim and his brother would make their way back to their bedroom. Tim would later recall, this notion that I was a bad kid, that I had done something wrong, and that something had come to punish me for my misdeeds, is something that has stuck with me my entire life. I didn't know what I had done to deserve this. From that point on, the boys keep silent about the nightmare experiences that they had had with the entity known to them as the Shadow Man. But the entity seems to grow ever stronger. But even though they have been silent, the rage that dwells within their father, Sonny, also continues to grow. Tim later again would say, he seemed to not understand what was happening in the house, and this led to a lot of family dysfunction. Whether this attracted whatever this thing was to us, or it fed off of the negative emotions or whatever, there was some kind of connection there. These entities seem to do this, and it's like a coupling. The entity attaches itself to a family and then continues to cause problems and seems to derive energy from this. As time passes, the boys find themselves awake on the night of Christmas Eve. Being rambunctious kids as some of us were, they decided to sneak downstairs to take a peek at some of their Christmas presents under the family tree in the living room. The boys seemed to be successful, not alerting their parents to their sneaky endeavors downstairs, when suddenly, loud booming knocks begin to come from upstairs. Trying to figure out what could be causing it, they realize that they seem to be originating from their room. Downstairs upon their mantel next to the tree, their mother had set up a nativity scene showing Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus. As the banging intensifies further, the scene begins to shake and move. It then drops to the floor, shattering the porcelain figures. The breaking only adding to the cacophony of sound, now reverberating all throughout the house. Then the heavy footsteps of their father cuts through the noise. As he descends the stairs, the boys are trapped. He is pissed, and then he finds the shattered porcelain figures, and this further enrages him. As he interrogates the boys as to what they could have been doing, the boys deny causing the sounds or breaking the figures, but this too only serves to deepen his rage. Since the boys, quote, wanted to stay up, they could do so outside. Using a scare tactic, he marches the boys outside and into the yard, right near the tree line of the forest. He tells them that he was going to get a good night's sleep, and they were to stay outside all night. Little does he know, he has inadvertently delivered his sons into the arms of perdition. The air is cold and bites at their skin as a large moon hovers above them and the low rustle of leaves surround them. The two young men, despite their best efforts to comfort one another, are absolutely paralyzed with fear as they stand in the darkness of the night. They both suddenly hear the crunching of leaves from behind them. Upon turning around, they are besieged by the Shadow Man yet again. Screaming for their mother as they run up to their deck, they beg to be let back into the house. Finally, their mother is woke up and forces their father to come with her and let the boys back in, finding the punishment to be cruel, especially since she knows herself that there are things at work that none of them understand. Tim would later say this when interviewed: "My father's anger continued to grow, and he became increasingly frustrated. He would blame the noises on us, and his punishments were severe. The goal of this monster seemed to be to create more anger, more chaos, and more depression within our family." The situation grew bleaker day after day, and on a cold and stormy night, as Tim laid in his bed, he was all too familiarly woken up, without warning. This time, however, something was different. His sheets and blankets were pulled from him. And as Tim would later say, "You know something's there. It's in the room with you, and you've got to reach down and pull those sheets back up." The boy reaches down to do just that, peering down as he grabs them off the floor. He thankfully doesn't see anything. Pulling them back over himself, now laying back down, he once again tries to get comfortable to sleep. As he starts to drift off, he then feels a sharp, searing pain on the right side of his ribs. Feeling this pain, his eyes pop open to find what appears to be a long, bony hand coming from underneath his sheets. Scared for his life, the boy screeches and runs as fast as his legs will carry him. But being this scared, he had his blinders on because he ran directly into the door that was locked to try and prevent his brother from sleepwalking and ultimately leaving the house. He smacks into the door with a visceral crack, screaming in pain and crashing to the ground. This prompted the attention of his parents, who came into the room to discover their son writhing in agony. They would quickly rush him to the hospital, and it would turn out that Tim had broken both of his collarbones. Following this event, as the months turned to years, things from here did not get any better for the Yancey family. Tom, being the oldest, when he became old enough, left the house as quickly as he could, no longer able to deal with the dark forces that dwelled there. Tim, Sonny, and Barbara would not see him for years. Details past this point are practically non-existent, but I will do my best to bring a conclusion to this very haunting case based on what I could find. Over the next 30 years, Tom would play college football and then become a career firefighter. Tim, given all the experiences he experienced before and after his brother left, would become a paranormal investigator and a park ranger. Drifting apart as people do, they wouldn't reconnect until after their parents were gone. Sonny and Barbara had continued to live at the same house the two had grown up in and had had all of their Shadow Man experiences. When the brothers inherited the house, they came back together to decide just what to do with it. Tom, who had done practically everything to never return to the house, would later recall that he had a sickening feeling in the pit of his stomach upon entering the house again, saying that it was just an evil, sickening feeling. As the brothers discussed things, it would become apparent that Tim wanted to move back into the home with his wife and reclaim it. So after working out a deal amongst themselves, that's exactly what Tim did. And by moving back in, he intended to cleanse the home, to rid themselves once and for all of this ominous presence that had caused them so much pain, the entity they knew as the Shadow Man. Prior to moving in, Tim would reach out to his friend Roy Hall, who had dealt with violent hauntings for many years, to help him perform a cleansing ritual of the home. Roy believed that the entity was demonic in nature and haunted the family because Tim's father was abusive. Sonny, who was a Korean War veteran, probably saw a good amount of the horrors of war. He believed that because of Sonny's PTSD, that perhaps the entity had been attached to the land and had seen this and exploited these problems as an entry into their lives, where it continued to wreak havoc upon all of them. As Roy would say in later interviews, these entities seek to cause further dysfunction. They feed upon it. The two men on a rainy and dreary afternoon would step into the home together. Roy would begin to pick up on the ominous, thick atmosphere almost immediately. Lighting incense and beginning various prayers, the two men go from room to room, cleansing. As they walk throughout the house, they sense that the presence is strongest in Tim and Tom's old room, calling out to God to cleanse the house of all evil and negativity. The process took about an hour, but following it, the energy in the house seemed to be rid once and for all of the Shadow Man. Tim recalled that things felt different. They felt much lighter, as if we had displaced the negative energy within the home. In August of 2009, Tim, his wife Trish, and son Gabriel all moved into the Lakewood, Florida home. Although they never experienced anything to the degree the boys did while growing up within it, there still seemed to be an undercurrent of evil just right below the surface. In closing, it is believed that the dysfunction of the Yancey household was more than likely far worse than what the sons portrayed publicly, but to what extent, I'm not sure. I did my best to dig as deep as I could, and I believe Tim and Tom are both still alive, with Tim still being a consultant to various paranormal groups across the country. I did want to say that their story was a terrifying and a harrowing one, and although somewhat anticlimactic in the end, as we know here on this channel, things don't always work out the way we want them to, and cases don't always have some kind of ultimate showdown. But a few questions I was left with after researching this case were, just what was the Shadow Man? Was it a demon? Did it exploit the vulnerabilities of the family, particularly Sonny, in order to create a feedback loop of negativity in which it could enrich itself with? And although from the outside looking in, those that are still with us who were involved seem to be doing okay, but just how has surviving the haunting affected these two men on a daily basis? Do they still think about it, as I occasionally do with my own experiences? All questions I may never have answers for, but one thing is certain. There was something evil that stalked the woodlands surrounding the Yancey home. Something stalking like a predator, seeking prey. And although things seem to be dormant for now, these malevolent entities may still be watching and lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment to strike. Don't let their victim be you. Thank you guys so much for watching this new video. Please let me know what you thought down in the comments below, and if you have any particular cases that you'd like me to research and cover, let me know. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe with notifications on, and consider checking out the YouTube membership program and/or supporting me on Patreon. It has been said that many have been plagued by ancient demonic forces. From Mesopotamia to more modern times, these evil and terrifying entities are said to enter our world and wreak havoc upon those who dwell within it. These are the Demonology Archives. My name is Cody, and for years I have studied and investigated the paranormal, and part of my fascination, and many others, is the existence of demons. This new mini-series aims to explore the origins, symbols, and stories surrounding particular demons, just where they are said to come from, what they are, and who they are. So if demonology fascinates you, I urge you to watch until the end, because you may just learn something that you didn't know before. Real quick, I wanted to let you guys know that I have brand new and limited edition merchandise that is only available for the month of October. Designs that were made in collaboration with a great friend of the channel, Phobicon. Now, I'll be in Scotland filming from October the 10th until the 25th, so all orders that come through, because I process all of them myself, will essentially be pre-orders and will be shipped out after the 25th. With that being said, it's available on my official channel Shopify store linked below and tagged here. You can also save money by bundling a merch item with a copy of my book. And if you're a channel member or patron, I will be giving out an additional 10% discount to you to thank you for supporting me. These will only be available this month, and once they're gone for good. So grab them while you can to support the channel, get some awesome merch, and rep yours truly today. Thank you. Today, we will be deciphering the strange and complex entity known as Zozo. In our first episode, Zozo is allegedly a fallen angel, one of the original angels who sided with Lucifer and who were banished from the heavens eons ago by God during the Great Fall. Zozo, or at least under this current name, is a relatively recent phenomena, only mostly emerging in the mid to late 20th and now 21st centuries. The name Zozo is attributed to the name Pazuzu, which is a Mesopotamian demon, which, in ancient Mesopotamian religion, Pazuzu is a personification of the southwestern wind and held kingship over the Lilu wind demons. Depending on who you ask or what sources you cite, Pazuzu is either considered a good or white magic entity, or an evil or black magic entity, considered as both a destructive and dangerous wind, but also as a repellent to other demons, one who safeguards the home from their influence. In particular, he protects pregnant women and mothers, whom he could defend from the machinations of the demoness Lamashtu, his rival. He is invoked in ritual, and representations of him are used as defense charms. It is known as firstly a demon of the home, a domestic spirit, then secondly as the wandering wind demon, traversing the mountains, seeking to destroy the innocent. The main representation of the white magic belief is the well-documented use of Pazuzu in Mesopotamia. His inhuman and grotesque form was used to frighten away unwanted guests, as well as prevent his wind demon subjects from entering the home and wreaking havoc, as well as warding off rivals and disease. His role in ritual and magic is documented on inscriptions on the backs of his statues, or in ritual texts, spells, incantations, and special artifacts which were used to gain the favor and protection of the demon. Such artifacts were often placed in and around the home, or worn on the person to achieve the desired effect. When favor was gained with the demon, amulets were typically given and worn by pregnant women to protect their unborn from other evil forces or demonic spirits. Large numbers of Pazuzu heads have been discovered, made from a variety of materials, chiefly terracotta, but also bronze, iron, gold, glass, and bone. These heads often featured holes or loops at the top, allowing them to be worn on necklaces. Occasionally, the heads would be attached to cylinder seals or worn as brooches as well. Some of these heads have been found in various graves. The current name of Zozo is often attributed to the Romanized naming of the ancient Mesopotamian demon Pazuzu. Zozo was named and believed to have been the main demon that possessed Roland Doe, or later revealed to be a boy at that time, named Ronald Edwin Hunkler, who was born June the 1st of 1935 and passed away May 10th of 2020. Ronald had accessed or opened a door to the other side using a Ouija board, the most common tool associated with conjuring this demon and many others, which we'll explore later on. The name Zozo was changed to Pazuzu, and along with the possession were written about in a book called The Exorcist, which was inspired by the Ronald Hunkler case by now famous author William Peter Blatty. The book was later adapted to the infamous and also arguably cursed film of The Exorcist, which was released in 1973. The name Zozo is also mentioned in the French demonic encyclopedia as one of the demons who's responsible for diabolical possession and corruption. Within the book, it tells of a case dating back to 1816 where a girl was possessed, and Zozo, as well as several other demons, are mentioned to have been present. Although with loose associations with older deities, Zozo's notoriety, as previously mentioned, is relatively recent. The first widely publicized mention of Zozo, or the one that most people are aware of, appeared in a 2009 online forum post by a man named Darren Evans, who detailed him and his family's terrifying encounters with the entity following Ouija board sessions, and that these encounters persisted for years. Since then, numerous individuals have reported similar experiences, claiming that Zozo communicates through the board, often spelling out its name in a repetitive and ominous manner. The etymology of the name Zozo is unclear, with some suggesting that it might be a corrupted or disguised form of other demonic names. However, its consistent appearance in spirit board sessions have cemented its identity as a distinct and malevolent entity. Besides the name Zozo, it also has appeared under other names, such as Zoso, Zaza, Zuzu, Mama, and Abacus. Some calling cards of the demon, so to speak, are: when using the board, the planchette is known to move on its own, sometimes in a rainbow pattern, moving from side to side, spelling Zozo over and over again. This is also known as the rainbow effect. It has also been known to make a figure 8, creating an infinity symbol. With the more modern emergence of Zozo, some believe that its power could be being strengthened through what's known as an egregore, or a collective group of thought form created by occultists for certain purposes. Although this seems unlikely because the entity does not appear to serve any human desires other than to destroy the person or people it comes into contact with, if it's able to. Egregores are typically formed to bring control over a deity for the person or group's intentions. Perhaps instead of an egregore, there is a cult worshipping Zozo, strengthening its reach and power through thought form. And with wider exposure, the more powerful the entity becomes. This is also known as forming a tulpa. A tulpa is a being or thought form that is created through intense concentration and spiritual practice, typically emerging in the form of a human. Though the term is borrowed from Tibetan Buddhism, the idea of a tulpa in modern paranormal lore is slightly different from what is found in Tibetan traditions, being added to modern lore after journalist John Keel mentioned them in his 1975 book, The Mothman Prophecies. Reports often describe Zozo as malevolent and deceptive, using the Ouija board to frighten, confuse, and manipulate those attempting to communicate with spirits. Those who have encountered the entity have been asked by it to chant out or spell phrases or various words in Hebrew or Latin, which has convinced many of the intelligence of the being that they were speaking with. When encountering the demon, one may find shadows appearing on the walls around you or the surrounding environment, if not indoors, almost as if you're seeing past the veil to a dark world that exists just beyond your normal frame of vision. Many users report that their sessions take a dark turn when Zozo becomes involved, often leading to feelings of dread, anxiety, and even physical harm. This connection has made Zozo a symbol of the potential dangers of spirit communication and the unknown entities that might be encountered through such practices. The Ouija board, however, is not the only way that Zozo makes itself known. It also shows itself through other means, such as sudden hypnosis, automatic writing sessions, and electronic voice phenomena, otherwise known as an EVP. When it comes through as an EVP, it may do so masquerading as something positive, like a deceased family member, loved one, or friend. Typically mimicking the voices of the dead is one of its specialities. The entity seems to love watching his victims squirm with confusion, and oftentimes seeming to take pleasure when the gullible human believes its lies. The entity also appears to be sadistic in nature and loves watching friends fall out over the lies, typically revealing half-truths or secrets to sow discord. It, or he, is a master deceiver, which is not surprising considering that the devil, or Lucifer, is claimed to be the father of all lies, and Zozo allegedly being one of the original demons who fell alongside him. If you have truly made contact with Zozo, do your best not to panic. It feeds off of fear. If the contact is made during a Ouija board session, close out the session by saying goodbye. Do not use the same board again, and buddy the old board with holy water. Post-session, do not speak his name. Then sage the area or have it blessed, especially if it is your home, and use sage to cleanse yourself. To avoid Zozo, set boundaries for the ghosts or any spirits before you start a Ouija board session. Also, don't taunt him or try to summon him. Zozo can possess you or make you go crazy, causing a potential mental breakdown. He can also make your nose bleed, and he can cause bruises and cuts. A more recent story I found online was of a young lady named April. She had decided to play with a Ouija board with some friends one night after moving in with her sister. She had dealt with Ouija boards before, but had no negative impact previously. When the group sat down and put their fingers on the planchette, they didn't open the session by saying that they mean no disrespect and letting them know that they had non-believers in the group. They asked if anyone was there, and the planchette moved to yes. Then, when they asked who it was, the planchette spelled out Zozo. They should have ended the session there, but instead they asked what the spirit wanted, and it replied, her. The group asked, "What do you mean? Who is her?" Zozo then said, "I want her," and then spelled the name, April. The spirit then kept spelling out Zozo, and I want her. April, who out of fear lashed out at the board. The board then quickly began to spell out death. After being told not to provoke the spirit further by the rest of the group, who were visibly freaked out, they would continue to ask questions until the planchette started to feel hot underneath their fingers. The planchette then started to spell out, Mama. One of the friends, who was too scared, refused to play anymore. Then the mood changed. April no longer felt like herself. She began to laugh and cry uncontrollably, and she then began to lash out at everyone present as the board continued to spell out the name of the demon, with those who were more experienced rushing to say goodbye. After doing so, April somehow would return back to her old self, but had no memory of what had transpired while she was allegedly under the entity's control. Other than Darren Evans and Roland Doe's stories, other possible encounters, other than those self-reported on the internet, have been the Doris Bither case in Los Angeles in 1972, when after using a Ouija board, she encountered a dark entity that then plagued her and her family. Another case I have covered, which I'll leave a link to in the description below. The infamous Enfield poltergeist case, which took place in Enfield, England, where a family was plagued by a sinister and malevolent force, which occurred during the years of 1977 to 1979. In 2012, in Tombstone, Nevada, a small group of soldiers were off duty and decided to mess around with a Ouija board just for fun. They allegedly made contact with a spirit who told them that he had died in Tombstone. And on the way back, the man who was driving the vehicle allegedly got possessed and almost killed the others in a deliberate car crash before the demon left him. Following regaining consciousness, the man had no memory of what he had done. I tell Darren Evans' story, along with some additional information diving into Zozo, on the untold story of the demonic Zozo house of Oklahoma, linked here on screen, if you would like to hear the terrifying and harrowing story of Darren and his family dealing with this entity. Something that I haven't said publicly until now is that I didn't speak with Darren directly, but rather with a verified close friend of his who went by the name of Butch. He told me that Darren won't even speak the demon's name for fear of its return, that the experiences were very real, and that he had dealt with them for years, and that they nearly destroyed him. For whatever reason, whether it's the result of an egregore, making tulpas, collective strengthening through a cult, or just raised public consciousness, the demon known as Zozo has become a popular part of modern paranormal culture, appearing in numerous books, movies, videos, and stories via internet forums, and some by yours truly. It certainly shows no signs of slowing down in popularity anytime soon. But make no mistake, Zozo is known for being dangerous and should not be sought out or summoned. The occult is not a joke and should not be practiced by the majority of people, in my opinion. So please be safe and be smart when dealing with the paranormal, especially the darker side of things, or you may just encounter Zozo or another entity from the darkest of realms, those of which we will continue to uncover here on the Demonology Archives. I hope you learned something new, and if you enjoyed me trying out this new mini-series and or the video in general, give it a like, share it around, and subscribe with notifications on, and leave a comment letting me know your thoughts down below.
Throughout history, it has been speculated that many have been plagued by an ancient demonic force. From Mesopotamia to more modern times, this evil and terrifying entity has said to enter our world and wreak havoc upon those who dwell within it. When a seemingly normal family disregards the warnings and partakes in multiple Ouija board sessions, what happened next nearly destroyed them. This is the untold story of the demonic Zozo house of Oklahoma and the abhorrent creature that stalks its walls. Oklahoma City, a small but growing city in the heartland of America, known for blue-collar work and brick-and-mortar shops, red dirt, and sports, would soon become known for something much darker. A teenager by the name of Darren Evans was growing up here, a normal boy by all accounts, doing things that any teenagers would enjoy, hanging out with friends, shenanigans here and there, and dating girls. He began dating a girl named Brandy who attended school with him, and the two often found themselves visiting each other as often as they could, whether that was walking to and from school, in between classes, or visiting each other's homes. One day, while Brandy's home was having some plumbing work done on some pipes located underneath the house, the plumber doing the work would soon make a strange discovery. Located below the foundation of the home, covered in dirt, was an old Ouija board. The front letters were partially buried, and the back of the board was solid black in color. Off to the side of where the board was found was an aged planchette. What made this finding even more bizarre was that 4 old jars sat on the corners of the board, speckled with dirt as well. Thinking perhaps the kids had stashed the board away and forgot about it, the worker told the young couple after his work was done about what he had found. And it's from here that things seemingly take a darker turn. Upon examining the discovery, they began to brush the dirt away from the jars. They were then shocked by what they found. Inside each one of the jars, sitting on the 4 corners of the board, were the decaying bodies of blackbirds, congealed blood and matter still present. Bewildered but intrigued, they sat the jars off to the side and picked up the board. As soon as his fingers made contact with the board, Darren seemed to have an instant connection with it. And with this soon came a burning curiosity to examine it. And this curiosity would manifest into obsession. With this, the couple took the board inside the home, where they spoke with Brandy's mother. She actively practiced the Wiccan religion, but had no idea who could have put the board there. Several days later, curious as most teenagers are, Darren was an avid music fan, and one night, after building up the courage to do it, he decided he was going to contact the deceased singer of the popular band AC/DC, a man named Ronald Belford Scott, using the board. Scott had passed away from alcohol poisoning in 1980. After lighting several candles, laying the board with letters facing towards him, and placing the planchette upon the board, he began his session. At first, nothing seemed to happen, but Darren was still feeling this otherworldly connection to something within the board itself. After trying for half an hour, to his shock and amazement, the planchette began to move. Slowly at first, it then frantically began to move by itself, moving from Z to O, Z to O, over and over and over again, spelling out the name Zozo. Shocked and unsure of what or who he had contacted, Darren said goodbye in an attempt to end the session. Before his eyes, he saw the planchette spell out, "See you in hell," and then it threw itself across the room. A now terrified and bewildered Darren ran out of his room and tried to make sense of what had just taken place. But this was just the beginning of what was to come. It started with horrible night terrors, He would wake up unable to move or speak and would hear whispering in his ears. These episodes at night were soon followed by banging and knocking throughout his house during the daytime, as well as a constant feeling as if he was being watched by something he couldn't see. But despite the presence he was feeling, Darren now sought answers to his ever-growing list of questions, just what exactly he had uncovered. So, he continued to hold sessions with the board, for better or for worse. Darren would later quote this: "The sessions now were as intense and paranormal as anything I have ever witnessed. A deep and terrible moaning could be heard emanating through the walls after these sessions. I developed sleep paralysis and became reclusive to society in general. I was once again messing with Zozo and Ouija boards, despite the terrors of my earlier sessions, in which I had promised myself I would never do it again. But again and again, I did." When not in use, the board was kept in a purple silk cloth and stored in his bedroom closet. It would also often go missing, sometimes for days on end. When checking back where he had placed it in order to set up and initiate a new session, the board would seemingly vanish, only to reappear at random times, as if it was the one calling the shots of when it could be seen and used. The years came and went, and the sessions on the mystical Ouija board continued. Darren, by this time, started inviting his friends to partake in the sessions, and although their sessions with him would prove he's not insane, it's of little consolation considering the tragedy they would seemingly manifest later on. Darren's best friend was a man by the name of Randy. The two had bonded over their love for the band AC/DC in high school and had been inseparable ever since. Randy's idol also being the late Bon Scott, whose lifestyle seemingly imprinted upon the youthful teens once upon a time, and perhaps would ultimately lead to the downfall of one of them. By now, Darren was living in his own apartment and working construction. At a job site he was on, he would make a strange but familiar discovery. As he was digging down into the earth, he found what appeared to be a jar. Upon picking it up to discard it, he wiped away the dirt and debris, only to be shocked by its familiar contents. Lo and behold, within the jar was a congealed and rotting blackbird, extremely similar, if not identical, to the ones initially found alongside the Ouija board underneath his high school girlfriend's home all those years ago. It was particularly weird, not just because of this, but the fact that he had found it digging down deep into the earth. He wondered, what were the odds of this? And although he had no way of knowing for sure, his gut began to tell him that there was some kind of witchcraft or occult expertise at play here. Perhaps someone or a group of people were knowingly contacting this entity known as Zozo, but for what remained to be known. One evening in 1985, Darren and Randy were relaxing at Darren's apartment when they decided to host a session on the Ouija board. Randy, more than anything, wanted to try and make contact with his late idol, Bon Scott. While wearing a Highway to Hell AC/DC shirt, Randy's intent was clear. The two dimmed the lights, lit a couple of candles, and began the session upon the board. They made contact within a few minutes. Once the planchette was moving, Randy exclaimed, "We want to talk to Bon Scott of AC/DC." With this sentence, the planchette seemingly obliged. It moved in circles, eventually spelling out AYEMATE. The two looked at each other in amazement. The entity was using Australian dialects. And for anyone who doesn't know, Bon Scott was Australian. After several more questions, both of the young men were convinced they were speaking with their idol. The spirit seemed to know every little detail to any question they asked. And during the session, the entity then made a strange request from the men. It asked them to light a cigarette and place it in the hole in the planchette. What proceeded to make both of them laugh also made them quite spooked as well. So they lit a couple cigarettes, one for each of them, and one for this entity. They took a few drags to keep it lit, and then placed it cherry side up in the planchette hole. The planchette then spelled out thanks. They then watched in utter amazement as the cherry of the cigarette lit up, as if Bon himself was taking puffs off of it. But this amusement was short-lived. Once the cigarette had seemingly been smoked, the planchette began to spell something very different. It spelled, F you, Randy. I will have your soul, and I'll see you in hell. Zozo. Zozo. Terrified, the men quickly ended the session by saying goodbye and tossing the board outside the second-story apartment balcony door. Clearly scared and upset, Randy also didn't take kindly to threats. He began cussing out Zozo with complete and utter rage. The board would later be returned by his downstairs neighbor. And after this session, a series of lows for both of the men seemed to manifest in the years to come. Influenced by the lifestyle of his idol, Randy fell victim to alcoholism. He soon would lose his wife to divorce and have split custody with his son. And although many opportunities presented themselves for Randy to better his life, for one reason or another, he was always just too far away to be able to grasp them. He often said to Darren, I feel like I'm in a prison, and I can't escape. For old time's sake, the two did one last Ouija board session together in 2005, in which Randy asked the board how he would die. The board responded, in a car, at night, alone. In 2007, after spending the evening with Darren, the last words he would say to him were, Darren, I will see you in hell. The next morning, Darren received a phone call from Randy's girlfriend, Alicia, saying that Randy never made it home after he left. Instead, he had passed away in a violent head-on collision, ultimately passing away in a car, at night, and alone. This devastating passing, along with the frequent contact with the entity known as Zozo over the years, led to a fascination and borderline obsession with a search for answers for Darren Evans. During the time before and after Randy's death, he had been living in a home in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, that would become synonymous with the demon's name. It was here that the worst afflictions brought on by the entity would take place to him and his family. Darren's fascination with the occult led him to hanging on to and possessing multiple Ouija boards and other various occult objects. It was here that he began to study on a much more in-depth and organized basis, just trying to figure out who or what Zozo was. But this research would soon be interrupted. In this home lived himself, his wife Kathleen, and their young daughter at the time. During a session with his wife Kathleen one evening, while their daughter slept rooms away, Zozo would once again make itself present in their lives, but this time seemed to take possession of Darren. Kathleen trembled with fear and bated breath as something stared at her through Darren's eyes. Something that clearly wasn't human. He then turned violent, attempting to attack her. Fortunately for Kathleen, she was able to say goodbye and get away before any harm could be done to her. Several minutes later, Darren would come back to himself, with no memory of what had taken place. After this session, things seemed to escalate in intensity. Sounds began to wrap throughout the entire home, from knocking to hissing, footsteps and banging, all seemingly with no explainable origin. The family got so terrified that they sectioned off a particular bedroom upstairs, calling it their safe room. One night, however, not everyone was within the safe room. Suddenly, an overwhelming sense of terror creeped upon Darren as he was trying to sleep. He rushed to the safe room to attempt to stop what he was feeling, but quickly realizing he couldn't leave his family behind, he rushed back out of the room in an attempt to gather them and bring them to safety as well. As he was heading towards the stairs, his daughter had heard his cries and was now at the foot of the stairs. It was here that Darren saw her being lifted by invisible hands into the air and carried away from him. Screaming for his child as she screamed for her father, Darren ran down the stairs as fast as he possibly could, but couldn't see her anywhere in sight. He then heard her muffled screams coming from the basement. At first, the door was locked and wouldn't open, but after adrenaline and brute force, Darren thankfully was able to open it. He then retrieved his hysterical child and brought her to the safety of the safe room. Once inside the room, the family huddled together in fear as they continued to hear movement and noises all throughout the house. After this abhorrent nightmare of a situation, the family knew they had to get out of the house. This situation and the many other paranormal experiences had led to a lifelong fascination for Darren Evans with the occult and finding out just exactly what Zozo is. But was it worth jeopardizing his family's safety? It took some time, but the family would soon relocate to another home. And once his family was safe, Darren was able to continue his deep dive into the unknown to try and track down and decipher just what this entity could be and where it came from. And although he knew the topic was vast, I think it went far deeper than he ever anticipated. Whilst trying to dig up more information, he posted his experiences to an old paranormal forum in 2009, and since then, many people have shared their experiences with a demonic force, many of which have been documented and compared by Darren himself on his website. But these experiences are not just a 21st or even 20th century phenomenon. They date back far older than that. Not every fine detail will be mentioned here, but I will do my best to list the most important details that I could find in regards to the origin of Zozo, according to Darren and other online sources. Zozo, in the Old Basque language, means blackbird or crow. The Zo people of Haiti practiced a form of voodoo whose rituals involve horrific scarification, as well as the intake and passing around of bodily fluids and bizarre rituals. Their witch doctors are called Zozo and wear demonic-looking masks. As part of their death ritual, when someone is passing away, they lift up the mask at the moment of death to take in the person's final breath. This is apparently done to absorb the soul of the person, to gain more spiritual power. Zozo, also in the Malay language, is the same as it is in English, but it translates to wandering spirit, which is a spirit they believe to steal people's souls while they sleep, which is also bizarre because sleep is often considered the cousin of death. Zozo has been called the minister of deception. It is known to convince you that it is a deceased loved one or friend, or even someone you've idolized, when in reality, it's not. Sessions typically start out friendly and inviting, but soon turn malevolent and dangerous. During his research over the years, Darren made contact with and spoke to famous demonologist John Zaffis, who shared with him that in his experience of over 40 years of studying the demonic and paranormal, the name Zozo and other pseudonyms of its name kept coming up in his investigations, which too led him to seek answers as to what it could be. In some of those investigations, when questioned, the demon stated that it was the son of Satan himself. But Zaffis thinks, perhaps as with many deities that seem to be lurking in the shadows, Zozo could be an entity that's existed far before the founding of Christianity. Besides evidence showing up in Africa and Egypt, there's also evidence found linking Zozo to ancient Mesopotamia as well. Other names Zozo has gone by throughout the ages have been Zuzu, Zaza, and Mama, among many others. The name Zuzu could refer to Pazuzu, the famed demon from the film The Exorcist, which in reality was a demonic entity from ancient Mesopotamian religion. It's incredibly strange to note the following as well. Zozo was replaced in the story of the exorcism of Roland Doe when Peter Blatty was using it as inspiration to write The Exorcist. He changed Zozo to Pazuzu. Zozo is believed to be the demon that possessed Roland. It was described as a terrifying form that first appeared in the Neo-Assyrian period, roughly around 934 to 610 BC. It had a monstrous head resembling a fierce lion or a dog with horns, and had an emaciated human body with clawed hands, a scorpion's tail, and 2 sets of wings. One translation reads, "I am Pazuzu, the son of Hambu, king of the Lilu demons. I have scaled the powerful mountains. They trembled. The contrary winds were headed west. One by one, I broke their wings." Pazuzu and other demons like it were held responsible for ailments like disease, fetal death, nightmares, and much more. Could it be that this ancient demonic force is what could be plaguing people all the way into modern times? The demon Zozo is also mentioned in the French demonic encyclopedia as one of the demons responsible for diabolical possession and corruption. The possession of a young girl in 1816 is noted as a documented case where Zozo, among several other demons, were present. Other noteworthy possession cases over the ages, ranging closer to modern times, that bear Zozo's name, other than the exorcism of Roland Doe in the 1950s, are the possession of Doris Blither in 1972 in Los Angeles, the Enfield poltergeist incident in 1977 in the UK, and as recent as 2012, where a possession incident led to an attempted murder. Other theories with how this entity could communicate with so many people so quickly and across the globe over the years, besides supernatural ability of its own, would be that its own reach is perhaps being strengthened by an egregore. or a collective group of thought form created by occultists for a certain purpose. However, this seems unlikely considering the entity doesn't seem to serve any human interest, other than to destroy the person or people's lives it makes contact with. Egregores are typically formed to bring control over a summoned deity for the person or group's bidding. But perhaps instead there is a cult worshipping Zozo. I mean, that would make more sense to me. People who have made contact with the entity via a spirit or Ouija board have also been asked to chant or spell out phrases in Hebrew or Latin, which has convinced many of the intelligence of the being that they're speaking with. What is also interesting is that the letter Z was actually removed from the original Latin alphabet because it was considered too evil when pronouncing it. It was said that one's face would make a death's grimace, like that of a corpse, and that it mimicked the letter S, like an evil twin. Perhaps the entity uses this name as some sort of mocking, whether to God or something else. One may also ask, despite the origin theories and historical details that could be linked to this ancient demonic force, how would one know if they encountered such a thing? These are what's known as Zozo's calling cards when it's being summoned using a Ouija board. The obvious is there that the planchette will begin to move on its own, but some less obvious signs are there as well, and are as follows. The planchette will move in a rainbow pattern from side to side, spelling ZO, ZO, over and over again, also known as the rainbow effect. It can also move in repeating figure 8 movements, like an infinity sign. The planchette will spell out various versions of the demon's name, like Zozo, Zoso, Zaza, Zuzu, or Mama. You may also begin to see shadows moving around the area where you are hosting the session, like you're seeing through the thinnest sheet into a dark world that exists just behind your vision. And you and whoever you may be with may start to feel scared, uneasy, or upset, seemingly for no other reason, before or after this takes place. When you tell this entity goodbye, typically the best way to close a session, it may not truly be goodbye, because oftentimes, depending on how long the session has been for, like an ever-widening door, the entity may have had just enough time to sneak in to begin to wreak havoc upon your life. And thus begins what many demonologists and religious leaders alike call demonic obsession, which is where the entity becomes aware of you and begins to crave you, which then leads to oppression, or begins to inflict various forms of torture upon you in an effort to break you down, whether that's physically, psychologically, or spiritually. It will also work to isolate you from others, especially those who care about you. And finally, if you're incredibly unlucky, possession, where the entity finally takes control of you as its vessel. All of which to me are absolutely terrifying in every imaginable way. Darren Evans to this day continues to research the Zozo phenomena, having been involved in a number of paranormal investigations, shows, and various other public and private events, as well as radio shows and podcasts, many of which he goes into various degrees of details regarding his encounters, other people's encounters, and other various historical details. He also in 2016 compiled his year's worth of research and experiences into a book, also titled The Zozo Phenomena, which you can read and learn more about the entity and the topic as a whole if you're interested. I'll link it below. I also pulled a lot of this information from various interviews, which I'll also be linking below, as well as an older website he runs that doesn't seem to have been updated in a while, but supplied me with much information to get the story as cohesive as I possibly could. I also sourced the photos of the apparitions from this site, some of which were taken by Evans himself over the years. So does this demon or ancient force truly exist? Is it some kind of elder god, a pre-Christian deity or being, or manifestation of occult or Luciferian practices? Did Darren Evans just make it up? And did thousands of people find it interesting enough to make up their own stories and partake in a mass charade that has lasted years? All of these answers may never truly be known, but my opinion is this. I think, not only given the wide array of strange coincidences and details throughout history, from the origins to the stories of this creature existing in distant past to the present, to literally thousands of people, from casual interest in the occult to more hardcore fanatics, religious scholars, demonologists, and more, claiming to have had experiences with this thing. With all of these details in mind, I certainly think it very well could be real. I do think there are things that exist in the shadows, things we can't see or touch, but that are there, watching and waiting to strike when and if the opportunity presents itself. So my advice to all of you, to avoid any possibility of opening a door that you can't close and inviting evil into your life, is this: don't mess with Ouija boards. These things are not toys, and whether you believe it or not, these entities do exist, and they believe in you. So keep away from them, because you might just let something in that won't want to leave, even if you say goodbye.
I told this story before in a video called NASA Engineer Claims Demons Attacked Him, the Bill Vale story. After making this video, Bill personally reached out to me and thanked me for sharing his story, but there was some information that needed to be corrected. And after lots of back and forth chatting with one another, I can say with great honor that Bill has chosen me to help clear the air and get the most accurate retelling of his harrowing story out to the world. Bill did want to include his reasons for sharing his story in the first place: to expose Satan, to offer hope that there is a way out, and to pass on the lessons learned from this, what worked and what did not work. With that being said, he was also generous enough to provide a signed copy of his amazing book, which was the source material for the original video, as well as this now more accurate retelling. So please, stay tuned till the end of this video for that giveaway opportunity. Now, let's begin telling this absolutely incredible tale. After a chance encounter with a strange ritual, Bill would find himself plagued by a merciless evil, one that threatened to ruin his very existence. Yet he was just as haunted by a burning desire to know the truth about what was tormenting him. First things first, in the original video I referenced that Bill was a NASA scientist. However, this isn't totally true. He was, however, an operations quality manager for a NASA subcontractor. So although there was misinformation repeated over many mediums, this is what he truly did. So there was a connection, but he did not directly work for NASA. The claim that he worked for NASA was erroneously added to the television show that Bill did, and he's tried to get the truth out since. Bill would find his life taking a sudden turn when he and his wife finalized their divorce in 2002. Feeling burnt out and needing a fresh start in life, he quit his job in the aerospace industry and moved to his hometown of Arlington, Texas, to be with his younger brother, Bob, and reconnect after many years. Being burned out from high-stress jobs, Bill searched around for anything different to do with his life and his time. Before long, he accepted a job at a water purification company, and his brother Bob joined him later, so they had the opportunity to work together. During this time, he looked around for a house and found one well within his budget that was a good fit for him, and the deal was made. In fact, the deal was so good that it seemed almost too good to be true. Early during Bill's employment at his new job, his employer had received a call from a client asking for someone to be at her house at exactly 5 p.m., not a minute before or a minute after. Wanting to prove his competence to his fellow co-workers, Bill accepted the job. He kept a keen eye on his watch as he drove through the suburban streets of Arlington to make sure that he would arrive right on schedule as promised. When he reached his destination outside an ordinary-looking home, the first noises he heard were the muffled screams of a woman from inside the house. Raising an eyebrow and feeling that something wasn't quite right, and hoping that they would just cancel the appointment altogether, he walked to the front door and knocked at exactly 5 p.m. At first, there didn't appear to be any interruption in the woman's yelling. He couldn't make out much of what she was saying till he heard unmistakably, "In the name of Christ, I command you to leave these men." After ringing the doorbell several times with no response, and knowing that the woman was just on the other side of the door, continuing her orders, he knocked. Then the door opened, and a strange woman stood in the small crack that had been created. She stared at him with a blank expression, as though looking through him. Behind her, he could make out the figures of 3 men on their knees in a darkened room. At that, Bill bolted to his company van as fast as his legs could carry him. He called his employer and told them that he would never take a call from that client again. Although the interaction was strange, Bill simply thought at the time that these 3 young men had done something terribly wrong, and that this was the woman's way of punishing them. Later that night, Bill's heavy bed shook violently for what seemed like several seconds, almost to the point of knocking him off of it. All he could do was be tossed back and forth and hold on as best as he could. Still in awe of what had just happened, Bill set about attempting to see just what had happened and what had caused this. Although wide awake and knowing what had happened was real, he somehow convinced himself that he must have simply been dreaming, so he laid back down and slowly drifted back off into dreamland. The following morning, nothing else in his house appeared to have been shaken by the quake. The clocks in his room read 3 a.m., and he wasn't terribly convinced that it was in fact an earthquake that had caused the disturbance in the first place. Later that day, he would search to see if an earthquake had in fact been recorded the previous night, but no such quake had happened. After this incident, dove birds would begin gathering in the trees outside of his home. So much so that the realtor who sold him the house was baffled. Quoting Bill here, "I was on the phone with the real estate agent when the trees in my yard became full of doves. There were hundreds of them, and they were so loud that I could not hear the conversation. I had to call the agent back later. This was within a day or so of me moving in. and then it never happened again. Strange, no doubt, but only the mere beginning of many strange things to come. Bill started to notice the pervasive and almost smothering smell of bacon in his home, as if someone were constantly cooking an entire package on his stove. Other odors began filling his home at random times as well, from the pervasive scent of ozone to perfume, then more intense odors like those of sulfur and feces. The atmosphere from here would grow ever darker. Each time Bill seemed to cross the threshold into his home day after day, the feeling of his house grew more heavy and foreboding, with a strong feeling of doom and evil. Mysterious areas of cold temperatures in the house became normal, and although Bill would try his best to find an explanation that it was caused by the AC or poor insulation or a draft, obviously being a smart guy, I'm glad Bill took so many steps to debunk things. But some manifestations are just not explainable, as we'll continue to see. At night, he'd experience things that would only get darker and more sinister. He would wake in the early morning hours to the sensation of a small creature, like that of a cat or a dog, running across his feet. But his dogs were kenneled at night. They would also growl and even bark at seemingly nothing in different areas of the house. I did also want to note that I had previously mentioned the various smells that would invade Bill's home, one of them being that of fecal matter. This did not occur because of any animals that Bill owned. The activity would continue, however, would be so slight as to be easily ignored, or even if it couldn't be ignored, Bill would simply accept that even if he did not know of a logical explanation, it was out there somewhere. The watershed moment for Bill came when he sat down to watch TV one evening. Suddenly, he watched as a water bottle that had been sitting on his kitchen counter from the night before flew across the room and bounced off the wall next to his head. It was at this point that Bill, in all of his logic and intelligence and experience, had to finally admit that he was dealing with something that fell under the realm of the paranormal, for he had no other explanation, no other reasoning that would make sense of the months of unseen forces toying with him. At this final acceptance that this was in fact something supernatural, the phenomena began to kick into a much higher gear, and the phenomena deepened beyond just sights and affected Bill's surroundings. Bill began to hear, as he describes, evil hissing sounds, and these would wake him up and would be accompanied by awful scratches on various parts of his body. Bizarrely, all white-colored things within his home began to be turned black. Black stains would appear on the carpets and walls for no apparent reason and with no discernible cause. As Bill would tell me, it took a lot of effort to scrub these dark spots, and I never did truly know why they showed up or what the purpose or message they were supposed to convey, other than just trying to unsettle me. Electronic technicians frequented his house, often due to the constant flickering of lights, failure of his computer, and television, and many of them stated that they had never seen anything like it in all of their experiences. His phone would call random people in the middle of the night while he slept, always around 3 a.m. in the morning. Bill called his phone company to attempt to find a solution to the problem, and during his phone call with the representative, a strange, aggressive voice could be heard, speaking in a language that neither of them could understand. The representative confirmed that they heard it as well and were baffled as they used a secure line that a third party wouldn't be able to hijack. One night, while calling his friend Michael, who happened to be a sound engineer, the same voice appeared on the phone line. Bill told Michael to hang up and that the voice was evil. Michael had already turned on his recording equipment, which he used to record plenty of podcasts and other auditory material. However, upon reviewing the tape recording, he could only hear Bill speaking on the other end of the line, for which he had no explanation. I've heard of this happening in other cases as well, that demonic forces often manipulate things to unnerve a person and manifest themselves, for example, over the phone. In another video, I told the story of the case of a woman named Julia and psychologist Dr. Richard Gallagher, where the line was secure, and yet low, evil voices invaded the calls between Gallagher and the priest who was involved at that time. Bill, needing more confirmation that other people were seeing what he was seeing, that he wasn't losing his mind, decided to invite his brother over and asked him to stand in his closet with the lights off. Bob stood in his brother's closet with the door closed. He would emerge a little later, disgruntled, and Bill had asked if he had seen anything, and he replied, "I think your closet needs to be cleaned out." Bob would later reveal that during his time in the closet, 2 large boxes had fallen behind him, and the cord for the overhead light had whipped him in the face, as if it was grabbed by an unseen hand. It spooked him enough that he didn't wish to talk about it further. Bill and Bob loved to golf, as it was one of the few times that they would get to come together and unwind and catch up on what was going on in each other's lives. One day, the trunk to Bob's car slammed shut while they were attempting to retrieve their golf clubs. They were unable to recreate the same occurrence on their own, as the trunk required some effort to close, and there was no wind to speak of on that day. At one point, when Bob was at Bill's house in his den, sitting at his bar, while writing down information for appointments, he began to hear something rustling around in the trash can out of his sight. He ignored it for a time, but soon thought that possibly Bill's dogs were getting into the trash, so he stood up and walked over to inspect it. However, not only was the trash can untouched, but he also had to pass the dogs, who were still in their kennels, in order to inspect it. On another occasion, he briefly used Bill's house as a pit stop on the way to an appointment, and after using the restroom, Bob noticed that the sway light hanging from the ceiling was moving back and forth quite erratically. He assumed it must have been an AC unit making it move. It was only later, when asking Bill about it, that he learned that in fact, there was no AC unit anywhere near that light. When Bob and his wife were at Bill's house for dinner, Bill watched the television and saw something move out of the corner of his eyes. He stood up immediately, wanting to make sure that he wasn't the only one seeing whatever this thing was. He quickly had Bob sit down and watch the TV to see if he noticed anything out of the corner of his eyes as well. Soon, a look of shock came over Bob's face as he saw something move in and out of his closet. When Bob's wife sat down, she gasped after a moment as well. And then all three began to sketch what they had seen, and all of them drew the same thing: small, 2 to 3 foot tall beings that looked like imps. For those unaware, imps are demons from European folklore and myth that are depicted as small, mischievous, and goblin-like, and were the familiar spirits of witches or even the devil's personal attendants. After this, Bill told them everything he had been experiencing, and Bob offered to let him stay over to get away from it all, everything that was tormenting him, but he declined. His reasoning was that he felt that if he left, it would be like running away and letting whatever was attacking him win the battle. Following this, his bedroom became a constant source of torment, as the bed would shake sometimes violently, and other times only just enough to keep him awake. Small hands would depress his mattress and hit him from underneath. He would feel invisible beings slide into bed next to him, and often heard loud knocks, bangs, and scratches from inside the walls. He would receive scratches and bruises without explanation. He then began to see the apparition of a ghost cat and strange cold mists in his house. The home at this point was a place full of an abyssal foreboding presence. Bill desperately wanted all of this to stop, to reclaim his home and his life. He began to research the occult, the paranormal, and anything and everything online and in literature that could give him a better understanding of what he was dealing with and possibly how to remedy it. I can relate heavily with this, although I'm very fortunate that my main experiences as I told them in the Willow Street Nightmare and the Cedric Horror, also known as my personal experiences, took place when I was a child. It has led me down the path of a lifelong fascination with the paranormal and the demonic. I think for me anyways, and perhaps Bill as well, that it's part of not only trying to find a solution in the active situation, but to later cope with just what we had experienced. The activity was also starting to take a toll on Bill's health. He found himself sick often and taking trips to the hospital much more than he used to. Part of these new ailments included the searing and horrendous pain of cluster headaches. As Bill would tell me in our conversations, watch a YouTube video on them to get an idea of just how bad they are. They call them unaliving headaches because they are so severe that people have unalived to end the pain. Cody, I would have tried anything to resolve them at that time. It is said that cluster headaches are the worst pain a person can have. And trust me, they are correct. In continued efforts to defeat the evil forces he now was battling day in and day out, Bill decided to call paranormal investigators, teams of people who brought state-of-the-art equipment to answer the question of if the supernatural existed and if there is life after death. He went through many teams, none of which seemed to be very scientific, according to Bill. That is until he found the team known as Did You See That, or DYST, which to Bill had the right kind of logical and rational mindset to properly investigate the beings that infested his life. He found their number and dialed it right away. From here, Bill's life would only continue to go down a rabbit hole he never would have found himself going down otherwise. It was a Saturday night when Bill heard a knock at his door. For some time now, he had been inviting groups of strangers into his home to investigate the happenings in his house. He had seen many come and go, usually only for a night, and none of them had truly been able to help. When he opened the door this time, there was only one man standing there to greet him, and his name was Brian Hall, the founder of DYST, a paranormal team that claimed that they did not search for ghosts, they searched for answers. Brian founded DYST in 2005 with his friends in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas. They performed investigations and posted their findings on MySpace and began to receive emails and calls from people wanting their aid and expertise in the paranormal. Part of the group's procedure was to begin with a single member of the team giving an assessment of the location before bringing in the rest of the team or any equipment. Brian quickly noted the oppressive atmosphere in the house, and once he had made his rounds, he gave the okay for the rest of his team to begin the second phase. The team was full of various experts in their fields, with a critical eye for anything that could possibly cause noises or strange phenomena in an ordinary house. They searched the house from top to bottom, and once they were satisfied that they had identified any possible areas of false evidence, they went outside and returned with their equipment. They set up a command post in the living room with cameras and audio recorders throughout the house, trying to pick up anything that could be lurking within its depths. That night, however, was relatively uneventful. As we also know from studying many cases here on the channel, these things, the paranormal, can't always be invoked or replicated to study because of the pure sporadic nature of it all. After the team had departed with little to go on, Bill called his mother to tell her how the investigation went. During the call, Bill heard 3 distinct knocks, as if the house was declaring its own malevolent victory. Unlike the previous investigators, DYST would eventually return over the course of the next several months to continually probe the home for its dark and sinister secrets. A variety of activity began to reveal itself to the members of the research team. Shadow people, imps, and even the disembodied apparition of a ghost-like cat were experienced by the crew, just as Bill had been experiencing. On one occasion, the team brought in lasers for a particular experiment. The tech was designed to cast a laser grid in the darkened room. This technique is intended to detect even the slightest movement that might be invisible to the naked eye. The first night came and went with nothing of note. The second was much like the first. But on the third night, where the crew used this laser grid, Bill, Brian, and the team sat in the command center, and they all heard a loud crash from Bill's bedroom. Upon inspecting the bedroom, they found the laser device on the floor. The device had been thrown by a powerful and unseen force. It had been flung so hard that it had struck the bed, bounced off, and collided with the dresser where it had been fastened before hitting the floor. They first checked the cameras, only to find their batteries drained of all power. This was a common occurrence during their investigations at the house, and it was a pervasive obstacle to finding any visual evidence. The team noted times when they could audibly hear the moment when their cameras were switched off by something that they couldn't see. Luckily, they found that the audio recording devices were still functioning when the phenomena occurred. When they played back the audio, they not only heard the loud crash, but something else entirely. They heard a disembodied voice say, "He's coming. Put it back on," just before the laser crashed to the floor. Bill was amazing enough to not only provide all the footage I've used for the lasers, but the actual EVP as well, which I'll play for you now. Despite the lack of visual evidence, Brian was determined to catch the phenomena on video. The next time they arrived at the house, they brought even more cameras and laser grids. They set up the equipment as before and let the newest teammate, Sean, lay in the bed in the master bedroom and asked, "If you're here, can you give me a sign?" Within an instant, the laser moved with a violent force, causing Sean to cry out in surprise. The rest of the team rushed into the bedroom to gather the equipment and to assess the evidence. All but one camera had been completely drained of power. This device had been pointing directly at the laser. The footage caught not only the laser being shoved, but a strange mist that formed around the laser, turning into a violent and aggressive vortex before the activity occurred, then finally dissipating after its conclusion. During another investigation, Bill and his brother Bob and his wife Cindy attended. In addition, Bill invited his friend Chuck and his wife Melissa. Chuck Kelly had been longtime friends with Bill through golfing. To call him a skeptic of the paranormal would be an understatement. His wife Melissa, however, was a woman who not only believed in the paranormal, but was sensitive to it in a way that allowed her to see beings that would otherwise be invisible to the naked eye. For a long time, she had refused to ever go near Bill's home. Eventually, Chuck confronted her as to why. She said, "There is something in that house that's intelligent and evil. Something that knows that I know, and I'm afraid of what will happen if I go there." There is seldomly experiences that terrify me personally these days. With having studied so many cases and having had a good amount of my own experiences, but the feeling that there is not only something evil, truly evil, within a place, but that it's intelligent and that it seeks to intimidate or hurt you. Now, when you feel that, you feel it in your core, your very soul, your being. And this is something that will make you truly experience the feeling that we know as fear. As Bill reached out to Chuck, Chuck told his wife that she needed to speak with him because he needed her help. When she met with Bill, he revealed everything that had been happening, and despite knowing the danger of the entity in his home, Melissa was moved by Bill's plight and agreed to attend the next investigation with Chuck. The day of, she felt apprehension. She sensed that the entity was furious at her coming and wanted to harm her. Her mind's eye saw a beast, like that of an ape, throwing itself against the walls and windows of the house, daring her to come inside. So with a deep breath, she did. Upon entering and being greeted by Bill, she saw several small and hideous creatures gathered at his feet. When they stood on two legs, they looked like hunched-over little men. And when on all fours, they looked similar to cats, but with the hind legs that were thick, like those of a kangaroo. Seeing that no one else noticed these beings, she ignored them as best as she could as she continued her journey throughout the home. When she got to Bill's bedroom, she saw that the imps were at their most comfortable in his room and played across the furniture and the floor. Halfway into the room, she froze. She searched every corner of the room wide-eyed, with her hair standing on end. She sensed something horrible and smart lurking out of her sight in a corner of the room or in the closet. She didn't want to know what it was. She left the bedroom and refused to ever set foot in it again. When the DYST team arrived, they sat in the living room to wait while the team set up their equipment. Then she observed as the small creatures gathered around her in a group of 6. They were curious, like wild animals, sniffing her and testing their boundaries while not letting her get too close. She believed they were trapped by the dark entity who used them for more mischievous activities, such as tormenting Bill in his bedroom, noises, and subtle happenings. Chiming in once again here, I've come across many cases where this seems to be the case. Not necessarily the trapping of demons by other demons for the stronger one's deeds, but rather a dark spirit or demon holding other spirits captive to invigorate or empower themselves. I just find it interesting that this is yet another case that we can add to that list. While pondering this, she heard a commotion from the bedroom where the team was setting up. She saw a large black shape leap from that direction and onto the chandelier, causing it to nearly swing and collide with the ceiling. It jumped down into a corner to hide from the investigative team, before lunging onto the chandelier again and then bouncing into the opposite hallway. The large black shape took up the entire hallway entrance before it disappeared. Unsure of how to process what she had witnessed, she collapsed into her chair. The DYST team convinced her husband Chuck to sit in the closet in Bill's bedroom. He had utter confidence that nothing would happen. The lights were turned off, and Chuck just sat and waited. After several minutes, he became impatient and spoke loudly at whatever they told him was supposed to be there, attempting to provoke whatever it was. For a few minutes, nothing changed. But eventually, Chuck felt the atmosphere change, become heavy and oppressive. He heard hangers begin to clink together around him. The team saw Chuck emerge with wide eyes and a face as white as a ghost. And all he could say was there's something in that closet. Neither he nor Melissa stayed long after this occurred. Brian Hall, after thorough investigations, enlisted the help of any experts he could to try and help Bill. Reiki masters, Wiccans, Buddhists, occultists, anyone and everyone who could attempt to drive out these entities. But sadly, none of them worked. Bill became used to the look of defeat upon the faces of the people who had earnestly tried to help him, but ultimately accomplished nothing. Eventually, when Brian reached the end of his ideas, he sent a single email to Bill. It was straightforward and to the point. You need a priest. Throughout the trials that Bill was forced to face, he found himself struggling with borderline PTSD. He was constantly in a state of hypervigilance, looking over his shoulder and watching his peripheral vision for even the slightest sign of something supernatural. He was dealing with an opponent that he couldn't see, but one which could see him and even attack him at a moment's notice. The suspense kept him from sleeping, and he met each evening with dread. He could no longer distinguish his nightmares from reality. He had a habit of laying down and closing his eyes for a few seconds, and opening them up again to search for anything that had gone amiss. The fatigue would take its toll, and he would often nap in the daytime to offset the sheer exhaustion that he was experiencing on a daily basis. The months turned to years, and the activity inflicted a cost upon Bill's health. He had 2 bouts of pneumonia, 2 heart attacks requiring stents, and would continue to suffer from cluster headaches, which Bill had never had prior. He only wanted the constant torment to end, yet he hid his turmoil quite well and became good at pretending that things were better than they really were, putting up a front of normalcy despite the reality of his situation. I feel like this is the only way that someone could continue to live through something this bad. It also affected those who visited Bill's home to the point that few stopped by, effectively isolating him. These entities, their goals are often to get you isolated and by yourself, so they can continue to torment you and feed upon your fear and negative emotions. At night, he would hear loud crashes inches away from his head. He'd awaken to find scratches all over his body, and always in threes. He'd get touched while laying in his bed, and hit, shoved, and would even feel the sensation as if he was being electrocuted. He looked around his room one night, wondering what was in the room with him, as he always did, when suddenly the covers were torn off of his body. He sat up in bed and saw a large black shape at the footboard looming over him. It stood 6 feet tall, with the body of a man. The man was wearing a trench coat and a fedora, all dark as the abyss. When Bill noticed it, it moved towards him, or rather, it floated. He felt an experience that went far beyond mere fear or dread. He described it as the sensation of pure evil. The shadow would travel the length of the bed, getting within 2 feet of Bill's face, and then would vanish. During the investigations, they had taped a dark mass in the very location this entity had disappeared. It dropped from the ceiling, making an audible thud on the floor. It would then dart rapidly across the room, rising above the bedroom window, and ultimately dissipating. Bill was so disturbed by this new threat that he did not and could not speak about it, even to friends. However, Bill was not the only person this entity he referred to as the Hatman revealed itself to. A friend of Bill's, a woman named Devin, claimed to have seen this entity and believed it was friendly, and as a result, was not afraid of it. After apologizing for not warning her and showing Devin of the other examples of this same Hatman entity appearing to others on the internet, he cautioned her that if she sees it again, to not communicate with it. It is not a friend. And unfortunately, Devin would not take his advice. Hatman would continue to appear to Devin, and at one point, Devin described it appearing in Bill's closet with glowing red eyes, uttering in a deep, growling voice that felt like it was scratching the interior of her skull. Kill Bill. My God, what a terrifying description. A voice so low and grating that it felt as if it was scratching the interior of a person's skull. Devin began to change after this event. She transitioned from frightened to angry, and finally to violent frenzy. Bill would often come home to find his house torn apart. He would later learn that the Hatman had appeared many more times to Devin. And it wasn't until Devin threatened Bill with a large kitchen knife in her hand that he began to see just how serious the situation had become. On one evening, after Devin had a tantrum of throwing and breaking things, Devin insisted to Bill, "He's here, and he wants you dead." Bill replied with, "It cannot kill me," trying to keep calm. Devin responded with, "Turn out the lights, you'll see," with a malevolent grin on her face. Bill was unsure whether he had lost his fear, no longer cared, or simply wanted to shake Devin out of the throes of this evil. Regardless, he shut off the lights. Although nothing happened, and Bill proved that the Hatman had no authority over him, Devin's personality only grew more aggressive. Eventually, neither Bill nor the police, who were often seen at his home, could resolve the issue, and their friendship came to a sudden and terrible conclusion. Bill believed that this Hatman was the general, the main source of evil around which all the other activity orbited, perhaps the main entity that had trapped the others and was calling the shots, so to speak. Bill began to learn from his experiences, accepting that he was in a war with an unseen foe that had tactics and strategy. They utilized scare tactics and fear to wear him down in a war of attrition, but he was quickly becoming a more worthy adversary against their assaults. Bill returned from a meeting and decided to lay down for a nap. He saw indentions like hands and feet in his mattress, so much that it became impossible to sleep. Then, a massive crash shook the entire house, as if something large had hit the side of his home. He shot up and inspected, looking for damage, but would find nothing. A second crash filled his house. He searched everywhere for any sign of destruction. His kitchen, his den, his office, but the same nothingness presented itself to him. He heard his car alarm go off, and he finally stopped in his tracks. He felt pure white-hot rage build up within him. He screamed, "I've had enough. You don't scare me anymore. I'm not the same person you picked on years ago. Show yourself and fight me. One of us is going to hell tonight, and it won't be me. This is God's house now. Leave this place." He heard another crash and ran towards it, continuing to yell that the entity show itself. Hell was unleashed inside of his home like a hurricane. Crashes and booms filled the air. Suddenly, the missing puzzle piece clicked. He knew that no amount of anger, desperation, or earthly knowledge would save him from this evil, so he called upon Christ to intercede. He screamed, "You were not invited. Under the authority of Christ, I demand you leave or be bound by your worst fears until final judgment." He repeated these words at each new crashing sound. Eventually, 30 minutes of unrestrained malice ceased, and a new peace finally filled his home. My God, the courage and overall fearlessness of Bill in this moment is truly commendable. I mean, just imagine putting up with these horrible things day in and day out, and holding out for so long. Although terrifying, no doubt, to have gone through, I'm glad that there was some sort of confrontation between Bill and whatever this entity we know as the Hatman, because I definitely feel like it needed to happen. The days afterwards, Bill felt a new sensation amidst the peace, like that of a chained-up rabid dog in the distance, just watching and waiting for a chance to break free and back into his life. While occasionally things would happen afterwards, Bill no longer felt like evil dwelled within his home or his life. However, the encounters left scars, both psychological and physical. Bill still struggled with looking over his shoulder and being comfortable sleeping at night. His health effects from the ordeal also never truly improved. Whether it was from the evil presence or simply the stress of the events, he would never be sure. Although in our conversations, thankfully, Bill said he did vanquish the cluster headaches, which he believes were a byproduct of the otherworldly interactions. In the years since, Bill has studied and become an expert in demonology in order to help others fight against an unseen foe in their own lives. He founded an association called the United Paranormal International. Bill's story has been featured on the show Paranormal Witness in 2013, and abridged versions of the events have been featured across the internet and YouTube. Again, in our conversations, Bill would tell me that he had to be talked into telling his story on the show Paranormal Witness by their producers. He's truly a man that values his privacy, I can tell you that for sure, but that he became convinced that his telling of his experiences would ultimately, and hopefully, have a positive impact on people who could be experiencing something similar. Bill has given multiple interviews on various podcasts, but decided to set the record straight in his 2022 book, Satanic Warfare: Tactics of the Demonic. In it, he gives his own account, as well as the eyewitnesses in his life of the events that transpired. He also includes extensive entries over just what he learned concerning the demonic forces that stalked him, but he cautions anyone attempting to utilize his methods. They are the collections of his experiences, personal beliefs, and convictions, and cannot be considered scientific. They are also not guaranteed any degree to be successful. He says that spiritual warfare is a form of psychological warfare, utilizing fear tactics to wear a target down over time so that we give up spiritually and obey evil's power. It is based on negative emotions such as fear, stress, anger, and social disunity. As a victim grows weaker, the demons begin to appear stronger. The first line of defense is to have no fear against demons. He states that as fallen angels, demons still have rules that they must follow. They only enter our lives to the degree which we explicitly or implicitly allow. They are not all powerful, for if they were, they would not be forced to resort to scare tactics and trickery to wear down their opponent. However, they have the experience of the entirety of human history on their side when they wage war upon human souls. Once you acknowledge that there is in fact a demonic presence, the only recourse you have is that you must call upon the name of Christ. Bill has since retired and moved out of the house within which he suffered for so many years. He now lives with his wife Carolyn Vale and his stepson Ryan in Arkansas. In Bill's story, we have seen how curiosity can be used as a doorway that can lead to knowledge and understanding. However, curiosity can be used as another kind of doorway, one that once opened can unleash an abhorrent darkness into our lives, one that is not always so easily cast out. I would not only like to thank Bill for being amazing and providing the clarifying details, the evidence, and overall just for being so down to earth and patient with me to make this video happen. In all honesty, I find him to be a truly genuine person, and in my opinion, it only adds to the credibility of his story. If you liked this video, please give it a like, share it with the world so we can spread Bill's true story and clear up any misinformation that could still be believed. And subscribe if you're new here with notifications. Bill did also want to add a personal statement. He says, "Cody, I so appreciate your hard work in bringing the facts to light. It has been a long, hard slog to correct many of the inaccuracies being told online. My goal is, and has, and shall remain, to get to the truth. Your efforts and hard work will, I hope, accomplish this, as I know you're a sincere individual who wants nothing more out of this story but to help people and to give them hope that there can be a positive outcome, to remind people that this is a spiritual war and must be fought as such. Thank you again, my friend. You did a great job." As mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you'd like to win a signed copy of Bill's book, Satanic Warfare: Tactics of the Demonic, Lessons Learned, signed by not only Bill Vale himself, but also the other co-authors, Monica Koldyke Miller and Carolyn E. Vale, then like this video and watch this video, along with 9 other Mystery Archives videos for 10 in total, and email a screenshot of the proof, so to speak, to mysteryarchives@gmail.com, and I will do the drawing 2 weeks from the release of this video to the day. Bill's books are available on Amazon, and I highly recommend picking up some copies today, as well as my book, Stories from the Archives, Volume 1. and please leave us both 5-star reviews. This helps us out so much on Amazon. Lastly, from Bill. Anybody who wants a signed copy of the book can mail it to Bill with a $5 add-on charge for Bill and Carolyn's signature and a $10 add-on charge for Monica's. This is to cover shipping. Then I have to mail it to her after we sign it, and she has to mail it to whoever purchased it. I did also want to add that my cousin Brett, also known as Phobicon, helped me with the original script for this video and will be posting his own content very soon. You may also remember him from the Willow Street haunting video that I put out. I recommend you subscribe and follow him for spooky stuff that he's got coming very soon. Amusement parks are meant to be the bastions of joy and wonder, where families can escape the stresses of everyday life and immerse themselves in a world of thrills and laughter. However, there is a haunting undercurrent that lurks beneath the surface of these seemingly innocent playgrounds. Abandoned amusement parks in particular possess a palpable sense of unease that permeates the crumbling structures and overgrown landscapes. The Shaunie Amusement Park in West Virginia stands as a testament to this unsettling phenomena. Once a bustling hub of entertainment, this forgotten site now exudes an eerie and foreboding atmosphere. Its dilapidated rides and decaying buildings serve as a stark contrast to the joyful memories they once held. The park's troubled past, marked by tragedies and misfortunes, has imbued it with a sinister energy that seems to linger like a specter among the shadows of its abandoned grounds. Whispers of the scariest amusement park in the world and tales of its haunted nature have only added to the allure and trepidation surrounding this forgotten place. The juxtaposition of the once vibrant and smiling faces of the past and the current state of neglect and decay evokes a weird feeling, as if the very essence of the park's former life has been consumed by the darkness that now shrouds it. This unsettling blend of the past and the present, the light and the dark, creates a deeply unsettling and captivating experience that continues to draw in those who dare to venture into its forgotten corners. The Lake Shaunie Amusement Park harbors a dark history. Nestled in Mercer County, just a few miles from Princeton, this once vibrant hub of entertainment now sits abandoned, awaiting for the next round of guests to brave to enter the haunted structures within. The land where the park was built has long since been a burial ground for the Shawnee tribe, with archaeologists estimating that the site may hold remains of as many as 3,000 people. This profound connection to the past would prove to be a harbinger of the park's troubled future. In 1775, a family of white settlers known as the Clays, consisting of the father Mitchell Clay, his wife Phoebe Belcher Clay, and their 3 children, Bartley, Tabitha, and Ezekiel, moved into the remote area and established a homestead directly over the Shawnee burial ground. This act, which disregarded the sacred nature of the land, would set in motion a series of events that would ultimately lead to the park's downfall. The Clays' arrival and their disrespect for the Shawnee's ancestral resting place did not go unnoticed by the local tribe. Tensions escalated, and the Clays soon found themselves embroiled in a violent conflict with the Shawnee, a clash that would leave its indelible mark on the land. The echoes of this tragic history would reverberate through the decades, shaping the dark and unsettling aura that now envelops the abandoned amusement park. The tribe, angered by the desecration of their sacred burial ground, repeatedly warned the Clay family to leave, but they defiantly chose to ignore the warnings. In August of 1783, a group of native tribesmen descended upon the Clay homestead while the father was out hunting. the Shaunie warriors proceeded to brutally murder the youngest son, Bartley, as he worked in the fields, and then scalped his lifeless body. Tabitha, the daughter, was tracked down and viciously stabbed to death. The oldest son, Ezekiel, was not killed outright, but rather kidnapped, dragged away from his home, and later burned at the stake in a horrifying display of violence. When the patriarch of the family returned home to find his children slaughtered, his thirst for vengeance was immediate and unrelenting. He gathered a posse of other settlers and set out to hunt down and take out several of the Shawnee tribespeople in a bloody act of retaliation. The haunting legacy of the Clay family massacre would linger over the area for years, casting a dark and ominous shadow that deterred most settlers from venturing anywhere near the site. The tragic events that unfolded on this land have infused the abandoned amusement park with something ghostly, as if there were spirits of the past still lingering, unwilling to relinquish their hold on the once vibrant but now forgotten grounds. By pure coincidence, the land where Conley T. Sneedo chose to erect his amusement park in 1926 harbored a dark and unsettling past. Unbeknownst to him, or perhaps disregarded, this very soil had once been stained by the blood of the Clay family, brutally massacred by the Shawnee tribe in retaliation for desecrating their sacred burial grounds. Initially, Sneedo's venture seemed innocent enough. A simple affair with swing sets, a Ferris wheel, and a swimming pond, catering to the families of coal miners flocking to the region. However, as the operation expanded, adding a dance hall, concession stands, a swimming pool, motorized rides such as bumper cars, a roller coaster, and then paddle boats, it was as if the amusement park was built upon a foundation of darkness. For a time, the park thrived, a vibrant hub of laughter and joy, with patrons blissfully unaware of the gruesome history that lay beneath their feet. Yet the land's thirst for tragedy seemed insatiable. A foreboding sense lingered, like a specter lurking in the shadows, waiting to cast its sinister veil once more. In the 1950s, the first incident at the park unfolded when a young girl's life was abruptly cut short on the circular swing ride. As the swing hurled at breakneck speed, a truck carelessly backed into its path, causing the girl to collide violently against it, her fragile body no match for the unforgiving force. This tragic event cast a shadow over the entire atmosphere, and the harbinger of darkness that seemed to linger within the park's very foundations was making itself known once again. In 1966, the park's thirst for tragedy was quenched once more, when an 11-year-old boy, his youthful spirit filled with wonder and excitement, ventured too close to the park's murky pond, only to become ensnared in a drainage pipe's unyielding grip. His cries for help went unanswered, and it wasn't until over a week later that his lifeless body was discovered, the pond's depths having claimed another innocent victim. These high-profile incidents weren't merely the tip of the iceberg, as whispers of other unsettling occurrences began to circulate. Tales of a man who plunged from the dizzying heights of the Ferris wheel, his motives unknown, to the accounts of 6 tragic deaths during the park's years of operation, as told by the current owner, only added to the feelings at the park. In the wake of the young boy's drowning, the Shawnee Lake Amusement Park shuttered its gates for good in 1966. The crumbling structures, and overgrown landscapes that now stand as reminders of the park's troubled past. A past that seems unwilling to relinquish its hold on the forgotten grounds, casting something ominous over the now abandoned site. The park's descent into abandonment was a haunting spectacle. Its once vibrant attractions reduced to rusted, decaying relics that pierced through the overgrown landscape like the skeletal remains of long extinct creatures. The site lingered until 1985, when Gaylord White acquired the land, harboring ambitions of resurrecting the park's former glory. However, his efforts were met with resistance, as if the site's troubled history deterred visitors from embracing its revived allure. Despite White's endeavors, the amusement park failed to recapture the magic of its heyday, and after a mere 3 years, it was forced to shutter its doors once more. In the wake of its failed revival, the land was transformed into a fishing lake and campground. Yet the park's crumbling ruins remained, their presence serving as a grim reminder of the tragedies that had once unfolded within its boundaries. Whispers of otherworldly occurrences began to circulate. Tales of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena were told in the local bars and on internet message boards. The park's ruins stood as a haunting testament to the complex interplay between human ambition and the lingering echoes of the past. A past that seemed unwilling to be buried. The abandoned grounds of the former Shaunie Lake Amusement Park seemed to be a magnet for paranormal occurrences, and the tales that emerge from its crumbling ruins do not disappoint. Visitors often report an unsettling sensation of being watched or followed, as if unseen eyes linger in the shadows. Sudden waves of panic or overwhelming dread wash over some, leaving them with a feeling that defies rational explanation. Chilling accounts speak of disembodied hands pressing upon shoulders, or the feeling of being pushed or tapped by an invisible force. Objects have been known to move on their own accord, defying the laws of physics, while shadowy figures lurk among the deteriorating rides, adding to the park's sinister ambiance. The swings, once a symbol of childhood joy, now creak back and forth in the absence of wind, as if propelled by unseen hands. Orbs of light float through the overgrown weeds, their ethereal glow beckoning the curious and the brave. Small child-sized apparitions have been reported dashing among the rustling hulks of long-forgotten rides, as if waiting to turn in a ticket for one final time. Even the spirits of the land's original inhabitants, the Native Americans, are said to make their presence known, with shadowy figures skulking about in the darkness, their whispers carried on the wind. The sounds that permeate the abandoned park only add to its creepy feeling, with disembodied laughter echoing through the stillness, as if the ghosts of children still linger, frozen in time. Whispers seem to come from directly behind people, sending chills down the spines of those brave enough to venture into the park's forgotten corners. Shouts and strange chanting, perhaps in a Native American language, have also been reported. Perhaps most unsettling are the accounts of those who have captured photographic evidence of the park's paranormal activity. Numerous visitors have been shocked to discover ghostly figures or shadowy apparitions lurking within their photographs. Whispers echo through the abandoned grounds, tales of a restless spirit bound to the very swings that once brought her joy. It is here, amidst the rusted frames and tangled vines, that the ghostly presence of a young girl lingers. her essence forever tethered to the tragic moment when her life was cut short. The White family, in their pursuit to resurrect the park's former glory, unknowingly invited this haunting specter into their midst. They acquired the original swing set, unaware of the dark history it carried, and inadvertently provided a conduit for the girl's spirit to manifest. Those who dare to venture near the swings often recount several weird encounters. A single swing, marked by a crimson ribbon, seems to beckon visitors with an unseen force. Yet it is the adjacent seat, adorned with an owl ornament, that appears to be her favorite haunt. On days when the air hangs still, the owl seems to sway and dance, as if propelled by an invisible breeze. Visitors have reported feeling an icy chill caress their skin, or the weight of an unseen entity settling beside them on the swing's weathered plank. Some have even claimed to hear the faint echoes of childlike laughter, tinged with a melancholic undertone, carried on the wind's whispers. These unsettling occurrences have left many questioning the boundaries between the realms of the living and the dead, and wondering if the girl's spirit remains bound to this place, forever seeking the joy and innocence that was so cruelly stolen from her. Also lingering with the abandoned park's confines is the restless spirit of the young boy whose life was also tragically cut short, but by the murky depths of the lake. His ghostly presence seems to wander the grounds, drawn particularly to the front entrance, as if driven by a compulsion to safeguard visitors from the fate that he could not escape. Near the lake's edge, a simple white plastic pinwheel affixed to an old ticket booth appears to serve as a conduit between his ethereal realm and the world of the living. This unassuming pinwheel exhibits an ability to move and spin without the aid of any discernible breeze. Its movements, controlled by an invisible force, seem to respond to the beckoning of those brave enough to engage with it. Witnesses have told chilling encounters where the pinwheel's rotation accelerates, slows, or halts entirely in response to spoken commands, as if the little boy is answering their questions or simply acknowledging their existence. Along with the apparitions, another phenomena has been experienced in the park as well. Voices echoing from realms beyond our comprehension. These chilling recordings, captured by the intrepid poly gear of mountaineer ghosts, offer a haunting glimpse to the unseen forces that linger amidst the decaying structures. One such encounter occurred when gear ventured to knock the weathered siding of an abandoned trailer. The silence that followed was shattered by a gruff, disembodied voice that seemingly commanded them to please leave. The ominous utterance sent shivers down the spines of those present, as if the very spirits of the park were issuing a warning to trespassers. Another bone-chilling recording took place between the rusted frames of the Ferris wheel as two friends conversed, their voices mingling within the stillness. A sudden interruption pierced the air. A shockingly clear, high-pitched voice, perhaps that of a young girl, uttering the haunting words, "Won't talk." Yet the unsettling phenomena does not end there. In the same location, another recording was captured, what sounded like the wistful plea of a child's voice, whispering either, "I want to swing," or "I'm on a swing." Above all the other haunting scenery located in the park, the abandoned swings stand as an unsettling beacon, an area that seems to have more activity than the rest of the park combined. Several visitors tell terrifying encounters as the rusted chains creak and groan, seemingly propelled by unseen forces. Sudden chills caress the skin, and an overwhelming sense of dread washes over the unweary, as if they've trespassed into a realm where the boundaries between the living and the dead blur. At the heart of these unsettling occurrences lies the persistent sightings of a ghostly young girl, her form clad in a ruffled pink dress stained with the crimson hues of tragedy. Some claim to have witnessed her spectral figure swaying upon the swing. Others recount her haunting presence lingering nearby, her gaze piercing through the veil that separates our world. The park's current owner, a man who has stared into the abyss of the unknown, tells his own chilling encounters with the girl's spirit. He speaks of moments when his body froze, paralyzed by her ethereal gaze, as if she held dominion over him. His words paint a vivid picture of the strange sensations that permeate the swing's vicinity. Seats swaying without wind, icy blasts of cold air caressing the skin, and an inexplicable warmth radiating from the very center, as if the girl's essence lingers here, forever bound to the place where her life was extinguished. In a haunting recollection shared with the Travel Channel, the owner's words echo with the weight of one who was born witness to the unexplainable. Sometimes this seat will start to move or sway your hand till you feel cold air blowing through the seat. And then you get to the middle and you feel something warm. And we believe that that's her spirit. Certain areas seem to exert an unsettling pull, drawing in paranormal occurrences like moths to a flame. The Ferris wheel, its rusted frame frozen in time, has become a haunting focal point for unexplained sightings. Visitors have reported glimpsing shadowy figures seated within the precarious confines of its cars, particularly the one locked eternally at the 9 o'clock position. Some even claim to have witnessed ghostly apparitions plummeting from the heights of the Ferris wheel, only to vanish into the ether, leaving onlookers questioning the boundaries of reality. Could these spectral forms be the lingering essence of the unfortunate souls purportedly leapt to their demise from the Ferris wheel's lofty perch? Or are they merely tricks of light and shadow cast by the encroaching vegetation that clings to the decaying metal structure? The uncertainty only adds to the feel of the abandoned amusement park. The park's murky, drained pond also harbors its share of haunting tales. Fishermen casting their lines into the stagnant waters have reported sightings of shadowy figures gliding beneath the surface, their forms distorted by the rippling depths. Inexplicable waves and disturbances have been known to ripple across the pond's surface, as if something unseen lurks below, stirring the waters with its presence. Some brave souls who have ventured into the pond's embrace have even claimed to feel an unseen force tugging at them, as if an entity from beyond seeks to pull them under and hold them within its watery embrace. The desolate concession stands, once bustling hubs of activity, now stand as silent sentinels, their empty shells bearing witness to haunting apparitions. Visitors have reported sightings of what appear to be Native American figures, aimlessly wandering those abandoned structures, their presence shrouded in mystery. What draws these spectral forms to this forgotten place? Their motives remain obscured. The history of the unexplained, coupled with the undeniably bizarre ambiance that shrouds this place, have transformed the abandoned Shaunie Lake amusement park into a mecca for those seeking a brush with the supernatural or the macabre. It has become a prime destination for paranormal investigators, ghost hunters, and thrill seekers alike. The park's reputation has captured the attention of numerous television programs, each seeking to uncover the sinister forces that lurk just beneath the surface. Some of these shows claim to have encountered genuine brushes with supernatural entities. But are these encounters true or mere entertainment? While these paranormal reality shows undoubtedly seek to amplify the spooky factor, the accounts they present cannot always be so easily dismissed. They offer glimpses into the haunting phenomena that seem to permeate the grounds, beckoning those with insatiable curiosity for the unknown to venture forth. The abandoned Shaunie Lake amusement park now embraces its haunting legacy, inviting the intrepid to unravel the sinister secrets that lurk within its crumbling confines. While the park's grounds remain accessible for fishing and camping, the dilapidated rides and structures themselves are off limits for most of the year because their decaying state poses potential hazards to the unwary. However, from October the 25th to the 31st, the park opens its gates for the Dark Carnival event, offering daring souls the opportunity to embark on haunting tours and experience a chilling haunted house attraction. Visitors are guided through the park's crumbling ruins, their footsteps echoing through the desolate concession stands and past the rusted frames, the Ferris wheel, where spectral figures are still said to linger, to the depths of the drained pond. And at the heart of it all, the abandoned swings still stand, their rusted chains creaking and groaning. For those unwilling to brave the guided tours, the surrounding woods offer camping opportunities through the looming presence of the amusement park's ruins, piercing through the tree line, casting an ominous shadow over the landscape. If abandoned sites invoke an unsettling chill, then forsaken amusement parks must be the epitome of haunted. Abandoned parks with a legacy of death and tragedy are about as spine-tingling as it gets. Whether or not any authentic spectral entities linger here, an undeniable air of desolation, abandonment, and bleak dread hangs heavy in the air, as if accumulating a debt of fear for every child's smile that once graced its now rusted, time-worn gates. Is this sense of foreboding and our tendency to perceive phantoms in such locations merely illusions and tall tales, projections of our morbid curiosity and innate aversion to the discarded, unwanted places of our world? Or do some of these sites truly harbor or channel forces beyond our comprehension? Perhaps the answer lies in a daring nighttime stroll through the hollow shell of what was once Shaunie Lake Amusement Park, if you possess the fortitude to confront the unknown.